Hi guys, tonight we step off a creaking wagon and into a winter so sharp it feels like it could ring if you tapped it with a spoon. You're standing on the open prairie boots sinking into crusted snow breath, puffing out in small white clouds that vanish almost as soon as you notice them. Somewhere behind you is the long road you followed west. Somewhere ahead is the problem of surviving the night. You look at the ground at the low rise of a hillside half buried in drifts, and you understand why people before you chose to live underground. This is not romantic frontier life. This is the part they usually skip. You probably will not survive this if you do it wrong, and even if you do everything right, comfort is not invited. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you are listening right now, half awake, let me know where you are in the world and what time it is there. Now dim the lights and stay right here with your body cold and your thoughts slowing as you move forward into the earth. You turn toward the hillside because the wind tells you to. It is not a suggestion, it is a shove. Winter on the plains does not swirl politely around you. It comes straight at your face carrying needles of snow and the promise of much worse by nightfall. The dugout you're about to sleep in is barely more than an idea yet, but it already feels safer than standing upright in the open. People did this across the Great Plains in the 19th century, especially during the homestead era when timber was scarce, and the land itself was the most reliable building material. That is a solid historical fact, one written into diaries and land records alike. Sod and earth were everywhere, and winter was not patient enough to wait for a proper cabin. You kneel and brush snow aside with gloved hands, finding frozen grass and hard-packed soil beneath. The smell surprises you. Even through the cold, there's a damp mineral scent sharp and clean like rain that never quite falls. You imagine cutting into this slope, carving a shallow cave just deep enough to block the wind. The idea feels desperate but also strangely logical. Underground, the temperature does not swing as wildly. The earth holds on to warmth the way a blanket holds on to sleep. Historians still argue whether dugouts were chosen more for speed or for insulation, but standing here with your ears stinging, speed feels like the honest answer. You start to dig, or at least you imagine it now, the scrape of a shovel ringing dull against frozen ground. Each strike sends a vibration up your arms. The cold turns your muscles stiff, and you have to pause more often than you want. There is a rhythm to it though. Scrape, lift, toss. Scrape, lift, toss. Snow crunches under your boots as you clear space for a doorway that will never quite seal. Somewhere nearby, maybe a mile off, a coyote yips thin and sharp, testing the evening. Sound travels far in winter, and it makes you feel smaller than you already are. As the hole deepens, the wind fades. Not completely, but enough that you notice the difference. That is the first small victory. You lean into the cut earth shoulders, brushing soil walls, and the world narrows. The sky still there behind you, pale and enormous, but your focus is now the shape of shelter. Dugouts were often just one room, sometimes no bigger than a modern bedroom, sometimes barely tall enough to stand. You're not building a home, you're building a pause button. There is a quirky detail people sometimes forget. Settlers occasionally lined dugout walls with newspaper or old fabric, not for decoration, but because it helped slow drafts and keep loose dirt from shedding onto bedding. Imagine lying down at night with yesterday's news about distant cities pasted above your head, slowly peeling in the damp. It is strange, but it is also human. Even here you want something familiar near your face when you sleep. You pause to flex your fingers, feeling pins and needles bloom painfully as circulation returns. Cold is not just a temperature. It is an active force. It steals attention. It makes simple decisions feel heavy. You glance back out of the hole toward the open land, now glowing faintly pink as the sun drops. This is the moment when doubt creeps in. Would a tent have been easier? Would you regret digging when darkness comes? Scholars still debate how many dugouts were meant as permanent dwellings versus emergency shelters, and right now you understand why the answer is blurry. Intentions shift fast when the weather turns. You climb fully inside, testing the space with your body. The ceiling is low, you can touch it with one hand. The walls are cold but solid. Dirt presses back when you lean firm and oddly reassuring. Outside, the wind howls louder, as if offended you escaped it. Inside, there is a muffled quiet broken only by your breathing and the distant creak of frozen grass bending under snow. Your breath fogs the air hanging there longer than it should, and you realise ventilation will be an issue later. That is a problem for future you. Right now, survival comes in stages. As you widen the floor, you notice how sound changes. The shovel no longer rings, it thuds. Each movement feels slower, heavier, like the world itself is asking you to conserve energy. This is where bedtime history gets intimate. You're not listening to battles or speeches. You're listening to dirt fall and a body learning its limits. This is what it was like. You stop digging before exhaustion tips into danger. There is a fine line here. Too tired and mistakes happen. Too alert and sleep never comes. You step back out once more, gathering snow to bank against the opening, later a crude attempt at insulation. Snow, ironically, can keep warmth in if it stays put. People learn that quickly. It is one of those quiet survival facts that never makes it into textbooks, but shows up again and again in lived experience. Night edges closer. The sky deepens to blue, then something darker. You take one last look at the prairie, at how endless it feels, and then you duck back inside your dugout. The earth closes around you. Not in a threatening way, but in a steady one. The temperature is already different here. Still cold, yes, but calmer. Less sharp. Your shoulders drop a fraction without you telling them to. You sit on the packed dirt floor, listening. This is where sleep will happen eventually. Not yet. First, there is the simple act of being here, of letting the ground beneath you replace the open sky above. It is a strange trade, but tonight it feels like the right one. You shift your weight, and feel the slope beneath you more carefully now, because where you sleep tonight depends on how well this hillside understands winter. You are no longer just cold and tired. You are choosing. The land forces this slow attention. A dugout that faces the wrong way becomes a wind tunnel. One that cuts too deep invites collapse. People on the plains learn this by trial, error, and sometimes tragedy, and you can almost feel their caution guiding your hands. You step back outside again, squinting into the fading light. The wind hits you from the northwest, steady and unrelenting. That is your first clue. Many settlers oriented their dugouts away from prevailing winter winds, often to the south or east, because even a slight turn could mean the difference between tolerable drafts and constant misery. This is a well-established historical fact recorded in homesteader letters and agricultural guides of the late 19th century. The land was read like a book, but only after enough people got frostbitten turning the wrong page. You walk the line of the slope boots, crunching softly. The ground here rises just enough to shield an opening, but not so steep that snow will slide straight down and bury you. You imagine storms stacking drifts like walls overnight. You imagine waking up unable to push the door open. That thought makes your stomach tighten. Historians still argue whether snow burial was a common danger or an exaggerated fear, but diaries do mention frantic digging and blocked entrances, often enough to make the concern feel real in your bones. You test the soil with your boot heel. It gives slightly under the frozen crust. That is good. Too sandy and the walls slump. Too rocky and digging becomes torture. Clay-heavy soil mixed with grass roots is the ideal compromise. It packs firm and holds shape, especially when frozen. You crouch and scrape at it with your glove, feeling the texture. It is gritty cold, alive with tiny fibres. This land has memory. There is a strange intimacy in this moment. You're reading a hillside the way someone else might read a face. Is it kind? Is it stable? Will it turn on you in the night? Dugout builders often chose sites near creek banks or shallow draws, but not too close. Flooding was a real risk during spring thaws. Even now in winter you imagine meltwater seeping in later, turning floors to mud. Scholars still debate how many dugouts were abandoned specifically because of moisture problems versus social pressure to build above ground. But either way, water is the enemy you cannot ignore. You settle on a spot that feels right, a gentle curve in the land where grass once grew thick. The hillside breaks the wind just enough. Snow piles unevenly here, not too deep. You mark the place with a stomp of your boot, claiming it. There is no ceremony, just practicality. This is where you will sleep, breathe, and wait out the cold. As you return inside the half-carved space, you notice how the earth already changes the soundscape. Outside, the prairie moans. Inside, it hums, low, dull, almost comforting. This is one reason people stuck with dugouts longer than expected. Noise softened. The world felt less sharp. That is not something you appreciate until you have lived with constant wind. You begin to shape the interior with intention now. The back wall curves slightly following the natural line of the slope. Flat walls look tidy, but curved ones distribute pressure better. That is a small engineering truth learned long before anyone wrote it down. You do not call it engineering, you just know it feels stronger this way. A quirky detail from the period is that some settlers deliberately left tool marks visible in the walls, believing rough surfaces helped prevent chunks of dirt from falling. Whether that actually helped, or just made them feel better, is still debated. You pause again, catching your breath. The air inside feels heavier already, warmer but heavier. That is the earth doing its job. Underground temperatures remain more stable than surface air, a principle farmers and builders relied on without ever using the word geothermal. You feel the difference on your skin, especially on your cheeks, where the sting fades slightly. It is subtle, but in winter, subtle changes matter. You think briefly about neighbours, or rather the absence of them. Dugouts were often built in clusters during early settlement, especially in new townships, but winter scattered people. Distance grew, storms erased tracks. Choosing the right hillside was not just about comfort, it was about visibility too. You want to be sheltered but not invisible. If something goes wrong, you need someone to find you. Historians still argue whether isolation contributed significantly to winter mortality on the plains, but the loneliness itself is undeniable. You scrape away more soil near the entrance, angling it slightly downward. This creates a shallow lip that can catch drifting snow and melting water before it reaches the floor. It is not perfect, nothing here is, but it is thoughtful. These small choices stack up the way good sleep habits do. You are building conditions, not guarantees. Outside, the light drains faster now. The sky turns that deep indigo that feels almost soft like velvet pulled tight over the world. A few stars appear, sharp and cold. You feel time stretching, evening chores slow, movements become deliberate. Inside the dugout you sit back on your heels and listen to your heartbeat settle. There is an old debate among scholars about whether dugouts were psychologically harder than physical shelters like tents or cabins. Some argue the lack of light and low ceilings increased anxiety. Others point to accounts describing a sense of safety, even coziness. Sitting here, you feel both possibilities hovering. The earth presses close. It could comfort you. It could also weigh on you. Which it becomes might depend on the night. You brush loose dirt from your sleeves, patting the walls as if to reassure them. The surface is cold, slightly damp. You smell clay and grass, a scent that will cling to your clothes and hair. This smell will become normal. People wrote about it without complaint, which tells you something about adaptation. The human nose gives up arguing eventually. You crawl toward the entrance once more, adjusting the angle of the opening. You imagine how snow will drift, how the wind will skim past instead of plunging straight in. This is not instinct. It is learned knowledge passed quietly from one settler to another. Turn it this way, not that way. Trust the wind. distrust the weather report because there is none. You settle back inside, satisfied enough. Not confident, just satisfied. That is the best winter offers. You sit in the dimming space, the walls already fading into shadow, and feel a small sense of alignment. The hillside is not fighting you. That feels like a gift. Soon you will worry about the roof, about fire, about sleep itself. But for now, the choice of place is done. You let that decision rest. The land has accepted you, at least provisionally, and as the cold deepens outside, you feel the earth hold steady around you, waiting for the next step. You know the ground will only get harder from here, so every scrape matters. Winter is already tightening its grip, and you can feel it in the way the soil resists your shovel. This is why so many settlers dug their shelters before the first deep freeze, racing the season the way sailors race storms. Once the frost set in fully, the earth could turn as unyielding as iron. You picture men and women swinging picks in numb frustration, sparks sometimes flying when metal struck stone. That image alone is enough to keep you moving now. You lean into the work again, shoulders hunched, breath steady and loud in your ears. Each scoop of dirt feels heavier than the last, not because it weighs more, but because your body is beginning to measure its limits. The sound of digging is oddly soothing. Thud! Scrape! Thud! It becomes a rhythm that pushes away other thoughts. There is a practical calm in repetitive labour, especially when the alternative is standing still and freezing. This urgency is not just imagined. Historical accounts from the Great Plains mention that once the ground froze, solid construction projects could be delayed for months. That is a mainstream fact noted in agricultural bulletins and settler diaries alike. Winter did not negotiate. It simply arrived, and anything unfinished stayed unfinished. Dugouts dug too late were shallow, cramped, and sometimes dangerously unstable. You stop to rub your hands together, feeling heat spark briefly before fading. Your gloves are stiff fingers clumsy inside them. You flex anyway. Keeping blood moving is as important as digging. Cold creeps in when you pause too long. It is patient, and it never forgets where you're weakest. As you carve deeper into the hillside, the temperature changes again. Not dramatically, but enough that your breath does not hang quite as long. The earth insulates by default. Even a few feet in the difference is noticeable. You feel it along your neck and spine, where the wind no longer sneaks in. This is why people trusted dugouts even when they looked crude. They worked. A quirky detail from the era is that some settlers timed their digging for warmer afternoons, even in winter, believing the slight thaw made soil easier to manage. Whether this actually helped, or simply made the work feel more hopeful, is still debated. But you find yourself subconsciously waiting for moments when the sun softens the edge of the cold. Hope is a tool too. You widen the space slowly, careful not to undercut the ceiling too much. A dugout collapse was a real fear. Earth that seems solid can betray you if its support is removed in the wrong order. People learn to leave a gentle arch overhead, distributing weight naturally. No diagrams, no math. Just observation and caution passed from one person to another. Historians still argue how often collapses occurred, compared to how often they were simply feared, but the concern shaped every movement of the shovel. You pause again, leaning on the handle chest, rising and falling. Sweat prickles at your temples despite the cold. That is a dangerous mix. Damp clothing steals heat fast. You wipe your brow with your sleeve and force yourself to slow down. Rushing leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to cold nights you cannot afford. The smell inside the dugout deepens as more soil is exposed. It is richer now, almost sweet in places like roots and old grass releasing their last breath. You did not expect that. It makes the space feel alive, less like a hole and more like a burrow. Animals know something about this. You think of prairie dogs and badgers, how they survive winters underground. While the surface world becomes hostile, there is a quiet humility in copying them. You scoop dirt into piles near the entrance, planning to use it later for reinforcement. Nothing goes to waste here. Even frozen clods have a purpose. You imagine stacking them against the walls, packing them tight. This is not architecture as taught in schools. It is problem solving under pressure. There is an ongoing scholarly debate about whether dugouts should be considered temporary shelters or a legitimate form of early prairie architecture. Some historians argue they were a stepping stone to cabins and houses. Others point out that many families lived in them for years, raising children, hosting guests, and enduring multiple winters. As you dig arms aching, you understand how a temporary solution can stretch into permanence when it keeps working. You adjust the floor, next levelling it as best you can. A sloped floor might drain water, but it also makes sleeping miserable. Too flat and moisture pools. You compromise angling it just enough to guide meltwater away from where you will lie. This kind of decision feels small now, but later when you're half asleep and cold it will matter a lot. The light from outside dims further and shadows stretch along the walls. You realise how quickly daylight disappears in winter. One moment you have time, the next you're guessing at shapes. Settlers often worked by lamplight, even while digging, but that came with risks. Open flames underground were never simple. Smoke, oxygen, fire, all things to manage carefully. You step back inspecting the space. It is still rough, but it is deeper now. You can crouch without brushing the ceiling. You can imagine lying down here, body curled, breath steady. That thought brings a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because you are closer to rest. Dread because rest here is never guaranteed. A fringe tidbit from the period is that some dugout builders left small niches in the walls, shallow shelves carved directly into the soil. These held candles, tools, or personal items like photographs. The earth itself became furniture. You consider carving one, then decide to wait. One thing at a time. You take another short break, sitting on the cold floor back against the wall. The earth presses firm and unyielding, but not uncomfortable. You listen to the outside world again. The wind has shifted slightly, carrying a low whistle across the prairie. Snow skitters along the surface, a sound like dry leaves. It feels far away now, muted by the slope and the depth of your shelter. You think about time, how digging compresses it. Minutes stretch, hours blur. This is labour that pulls you fully into the present. There is no room for long-term planning when your hands are cold and the sun is going down. That focus is exhausting, but it is also grounding. You are exactly where you are. You stand again and take a few final scoops, stopping when your arms begin to tremble. That is your cue. Pushing past it would only invite mistakes. You smooth the walls with the flat of the shovel, tamping loose dirt back into place. The surface firms under pressure, cool and solid. This is as good as it gets for now. You step back toward the entrance, dirt clinging to your clothes. You look at what you have made, not impressive, not comfortable, but real. A space carved from urgency and care. The freeze is coming, but you have beaten it back for one more night. As darkness settles fully outside, you retreat into the dugout, letting the hillside swallow the last light. The digging is done, at least for now. Your body hums with fatigue, a deep tiredness that promises sleep if you can stay warm. You breathe in the earthy air and feel the ground hold. Tomorrow there will be more work. Tonight this will have to be enough. You start shaping the walls with more care now, because this is the part where hope gets packed into dirt. The space is no longer just a hole. It is becoming something you will trust with your sleep. You press the shovel blade flat against the soil and smooth it, pushing loose grains back into place. The wall firms under pressure, cold and slightly damp like clay waiting to be fired. Every motion feels deliberate, almost gentle. Rough walls shed dirt in the night. Solid ones stay quiet. Accounts from 19th century homesteaders describe how packed earth could become surprisingly strong, especially when mixed with grass roots that acted like natural reinforcement. That detail shows up again and again in letters sent east, often with a tone of mild amazement. People did not expect dirt to behave like a building material, yet here it is standing between you and the winter. You lean your shoulder into the wall and test it. It does not move. That small success brings a flicker of confidence, not joy, just the absence of fear for a moment. You work along the sides, tamping down soft spots, rounding corners, so there are no weak angles. Sharp corners crack. Curves distribute pressure. This is not theory. It is learned through watching what fails. There is a lesser-known detail tucked into some settler journals. A few people mixed straw or dry grass into loose soil and packed it back into the walls, believing it helped prevent crumbling. Whether this actually strengthened the structure or simply made the builders feel more in control remains uncertain, but the practice appears often enough to suggest it mattered to them. You consider the grass clinging to the soil here and decide not to strip it away. Let the land help itself. You crouch low as you work, knees stiff, breath slow. The ceiling hangs close overhead. You can feel its weight without touching it, a gentle pressure on your awareness. Some people found this unbearable, others found it comforting. Interpretations still differ among modern historians about whether living underground increased anxiety or reduced it by offering protection. Right now, you feel both impulses tugging at you. The earth presses close and you have to remind yourself it is meant to. The smell inside the dugout deepens as the walls smooth. It is no longer sharp dirt. It is something warmer, like old rain soaked into soil. This smell will cling to you. Clothes, hair, blankets. People wrote about it without much complaint, which says more about adaptation than enthusiasm. When survival is the goal, comfort standards shift quietly. You pause to listen. The wind outside has risen again, a steady low roar sliding over the hillside. Inside, the sound dulls to a murmur. This is one of the unspoken benefits of dugout living. Noise loses its edge. Thunder becomes a thump. Wind becomes breath. That quiet seeps into your body whether you want it to or not. You smooth the back wall last because it will be closest to where you sleep. You imagine leaning against it, head resting near the packed earth. You want it firm. You want it predictable. There is a strange trust involved here, trusting something that could collapse if treated poorly. That trust is built stroke by stroke. You take a moment to check the floor again. Loose dirt gets scraped away, then tamped down. You use your boots, pressing heel to toe, compacting the surface. It becomes harder underfoot, less dusty. This matters. Dust gets into bedding. Dust gets into lungs. Dugouts were notorious for being dusty in dry weather and muddy and wet, a contradiction that frustrated settlers endlessly. The balance was hard to maintain. There is an unresolved question among researchers about how often dugout walls were repacked and maintained. Some evidence suggests people did it regularly, smoothing and reinforcing after storms or freezes. Other accounts imply neglect, with walls left to shed and slump until spring. You suspect the truth depended on energy levels and morale. When you're cold and tired, maintenance feels optional until it becomes urgent. You straighten slowly, stretching your back. Muscles protest, but the ache is manageable. This is a working ache, not an injury. You rub your hands together again, feeling warmth bloom briefly. The cold never fully leaves. It just waits. Light from the entrance has dimmed to a bluish glow. Outside, evening has given way to night. You will not do much more digging or shaping now. Darkness changes priorities. You run your hand along the wall one last time, feeling for loose spots. It holds. That is enough. An odd habit mentioned in a few personal accounts is that some settlers mark the date of completion by scratching it into the wall with a nail or knife. A private milestone hidden from view. You consider doing the same, then decide against it. You will remember this night without carving it into the earth. You sit back against the wall, letting your body rest. The dirt is cold through your clothes, but steady. The dugout feels quieter now, more settled. As if it knows what it is meant to be. You breathe slowly, matching the rhythm of the space. Outside, snow begins to fall again. You can hear it faintly, a soft hiss against the ground. Inside, the walls hold firm, packed with your effort and the weight of expectation. This is not comfort yet, but it is progress. The earth around you feels less like a threat and more like a barrier. That shift matters. You close your eyes briefly, testing how it feels to sit in the dark. Your other senses sharpen. The smell of soil, the muted sound of wind, the pressure of packed earth at your back. This is where sleep will come later if you allow it. For now, you simply sit, letting the dugout settle into its shape and into your awareness. The walls are done. The hope is packed in. What comes next will decide how the night unfolds. You look up because everything now depends on what goes above your head. Walls can forgive a lot. A roof cannot. The space you carved feels steady, but without cover it is just a pit waiting to fill with snow, wind and regret. You step back outside, neck craned toward the darkening sky, and feel the cold settle again on your face. This is where winter reminds you who is in charge. People living on the plains often built dugout roofs from whatever they could gather nearby. Period descriptions talk about cottonwood poles, fence rails, or even wagon parts laid side by side, then covered with brush grass and thick layers of sod. Timber was scarce in many regions, so ingenuity filled the gaps. This is not folklore. It is recorded in homestead claims and personal letters that mention roofs sagging, leaking, or in rare cases giving way entirely. You drag a few rough poles into position, their surfaces slick with frost. They're heavier than you expect, not just in weight, but in consequence. Each one must carry part of the earth above. You angle them carefully across the opening, spacing them close enough that nothing can slip through. Too far apart and the ceiling caves. Too close and you waste strength you cannot spare. Inside the dugout again, you brace one end of a pole into a shallow notch you carved earlier. It settles with a dull thump. The sound makes your shoulders tense, but the wall holds. You test it gently, pressing upward. Solid. You move to the next, repeating the process, your breath loud in the confined space. This is slow work, careful work, the kind that keeps you alive. One small but curious practice mentioned in a handful of frontier diaries is that some builders deliberately left the poles slightly uneven, believing it helped distribute weight more naturally. Whether that belief had any real structural benefit remains unclear, but you find yourself instinctively avoiding perfect alignment. Perfection feels risky here. Irregularity feels forgiving. You climb out again to add the next layer. Brush grass whatever you can pull from beneath the snow. Your gloves snag on brittle stems. The smell of dried vegetation rises faint but comforting. This layer matters more than it looks. It keeps dirt from sifting down between the poles and raining onto your bedding later. Many settlers complained about waking to grit in their mouths when this step was rushed or skipped. As you pile material on the roof begins to disappear under your hands. What was once an opening becomes a mound. You shovel dirt on top, packing it carefully, patting it down with the flat of the blade. Each scoop adds weight. Each scoop adds insulation. You feel the contradiction keenly. The roof must be heavy enough to seal, but not so heavy it collapses. There is disagreement among historians about how thick dugout roofs typically were. Some sources suggest a foot or more of packed earth. Others argue most were thinner, especially when built quickly. Standing here, muscles aching, you understand why thickness varied. You stop when your arms tell you to. Survival often listens to the body more than to ideals. You crawl back inside to inspect from below. The ceiling is low now, closer than before. You can reach up and touch the poles. They feel cold, rough. You press gently. Nothing shifts. That brings a slow exhale you didn't realize you were holding. The space feels more enclosed, but also more secure. The earth above muffles sound even further. The wind outside fades to a distant presence. An odd detail found in a few personal accounts is that some people painted their roof poles with lime or whitewash, partly to reflect light and partly to discourage insects. Whether insects were truly a problem in winter dugouts is questionable, but the desire to control the environment extended even here. You have no paint. You make do with darkness. You sit back on your heels and look up at the ceiling, imagining snow piling on top as the night goes on. The idea is unsettling, but also oddly reassuring. Snow adds insulation. Snow presses everything tighter together. The roof becomes part of the land again disguised. From a distance, no one would know you are here. There is still uncertainty among researchers about how often dugout roofs failed during winter storms. Some accounts describe terrifying collapses. Others suggest such events were rare and often exaggerated later. You suspect memory sharpened fear over time. Sitting here now, you feel the weight above you and choose to trust your work. You reach up and brush loose dirt from a pole, watching it fall in a thin line to the floor. That small cascade makes your heart jump, then settle. This is the rhythm of living here. Constant awareness, constant adjustment. The space is darker now, the only light a faint blue glow from the doorway. The roof blocks the sky completely. You feel a shift inside yourself as well. Outside is no longer an option. This is where you will sleep. You crawl toward the entrance and begin banking snow and dirt around the edges, sealing gaps as best you can. Cold air sneaks in anyway, but slower. You can feel it on your ankles, a reminder that perfection is not required, only improvement. When you finally sit back inside, roof finished, the dugout feels different. Smaller, yes, but finished in a way that matters. The ceiling holds. The walls stand. The earth presses down and around you, firm and quiet. You lean back and let your neck relax. This roof, imperfect and heavy, is the line between you and the winter sky. It will creak. It will shed dirt. But for tonight it holds. And that is enough to let your body begin to slow. You crouch near the opening and study it the way you would study a wound, because this is where the cold will try to get back in. The doorway sounds simple until you realize it is just a hole you keep reopening every time you move. Too wide and wind rushes through. Too narrow and you bruise your shoulders every entry and exit. You breathe out slowly, fog drifting forward, and begin shaping the edges with care. Many settlers oriented their dugout entrances deliberately, often turning them away from prevailing winter winds. Letters and land reports from the plains mention this choice, often sometimes with regret when it was done wrong. A poorly aimed doorway could make the inside colder than the open air, turning the shelter into a funnel for misery. You angle yours slightly, using the curve of the hillside to break the wind before it reaches you. You scrape and smooth the sides rounding them, so drifting snow is more likely to pile up outside than spill in. Snow, when it stays put, is a surprisingly good insulator. This is one of those practical truths people learned by living through winters, not by reading manuals. You pack dirt along the lower edge, forming a shallow threshold that catches meltwater. Your boots scuff the ground as you test it, stepping in and out, feeling where cold air slips through. Inside, you pause and listen. The difference is subtle, but real. The wind no longer whistles straight through. It slides past instead, like water diverted by a stone. That small change eases the tightness in your chest. Control, even partial, feels powerful here. There is a curious habit noted in a few frontier accounts, where people hung blankets or hides over their dugout entrances, weighted at the bottom with stones. This created a flexible barrier that moved when you passed, but settled back into place afterward. Whether it stopped much cold is debatable, but it certainly reduced drafts. You imagine pushing through heavy fabric in the dark, feeling its familiar weight brush your face. Comfort sometimes came from texture as much as temperature. You consider what you have available. Maybe a coat you can spare later. Maybe sacks. For now you settle for banking more snow and dirt along the edges, pressing it in with gloved hands. The cold bites at your fingers, sharp and immediate. You pull back, shaking your hands to bring life back into them. The doorway demands respect. You sit just inside the entrance, legs stretched out, and test how the air moves. Cold still creeps along the floor, hugging the ground. Warm air rises and has nowhere to go. This creates a strange balance where your head feels almost comfortable while your feet ache. Dugout dwellers often slept with feet toward the fire. For this reason, a detail mentioned casually in personal letters that reveal a lot about daily adaptation. There is no consensus among modern researchers about how airtight dugouts typically were. Some argue they were drafty and miserable. Others point to accounts describing them as surprisingly snug. Sitting here now, you suspect both are true depending on how much care went into details like this doorway. Shelter is not just about walls and roofs. It is about edges. You scrape the top of the opening slightly higher, shaping it so melting snow drips outward rather than inward. Water is quieter than wind, but more persistent. You imagine spring thaws, later muddy floors, damp bedding. That is not tonight's problem, but you feel it hovering in the future. Dugout life always asked you to think one season ahead while surviving the current one. As darkness thickens, you notice how the doorway frames the outside world. A rectangle of night stars, faint and sharp. The prairie beyond feels distant now, almost unreal. This small opening is your only connection to it. That thought is both comforting and unsettling. You control what comes in. You also depend on it for air and light. An overlooked detail from some homesteader recollections is how often doorways had to be reworked after storms. Snow drifted differently than expected. Wind shifted. What worked one night failed the next. Living here meant constant adjustment. You accept that now. Nothing you build tonight is final. You crawl back deeper into the dugout and sit against the wall, watching the doorway from a few feet away. Cold air creeps in low and slow like a cautious animal. It does not rush anymore. That is progress. You pull your coat tighter, feeling fabric bunch around your shoulders. The space feels more private now, more defined. The doorway is no longer just an absence. It is a controlled opening. That distinction matters when you are trying to rest. You reach out and pat the dirt beside the entrance, firming one last loose patch. The wall answers back with a dull solidity. You nod to yourself, a small gesture in the dark. This is as good as it gets for tonight. Soon you will worry about light and fire, about smoke curling where it should not. But for this moment you let your attention settle on the doorway, satisfied that it will not betray you immediately. The wind outside continues its long argument with the prairie. Inside you sit quietly, letting the earth hold the line. You kneel in the half-light and realize how dark underground night really is. Outside, even winter darkness has stars' moon glow a sense of space. In here, darkness settles thick and close, pressing against your eyes, until you blink just to reassure yourself they are still open. If you're going to stay awake much longer, you need light. If you're going to stay warm through the night, you need fire. And those two needs do not cooperate easily. You clear a small patch of floor near the doorway, scraping it down to bare-packed earth. Fire indoors is always a negotiation. Too close to the centre and smoke fills the space. Too close to the wall and heat cracks the soil or ignites something you cannot put out. People living in dugouts often relied on very small fires, sometimes no more than glowing coals, because anything larger quickly made the air unbreathable. Old farm journals describe eyes, stinging lungs, burning and headaches that lingered long after the flames died down. You arrange a few scraps of wood, whatever you managed to gather earlier. Thin sticks, brittle and light. Fuel is precious here. Trees are distant, scattered. On the plains, firewood was hauled miles or substituted with anything that would burn. That reality shaped every decision about warmth. You strike a match, shielding it with your hand. The flare is sudden, bright, almost shocking in the dark. For a moment the dugout walls glow orange, every curve and tool mark revealed. The fire catches reluctantly, licking along the dry fibres. You blow gently, careful not to scatter sparks. Smoke curls upward, immediately pooling beneath the low ceiling before drifting toward the doorway. You watch it closely. Smoke is not just annoying, it is dangerous. People wrote about waking dizzy, confused or sick after sleeping with a fire smouldering too long. Some never woke at all. That risk haunted winter nights. You sit back on your heels and observe. The flame is small, obedient for now. The light it casts is warm and uneven shadows dancing along the walls. The dugout feels suddenly alive, like a shelter instead of a hole. You understand why fire mattered beyond heat. It pushed back the dark. It gave the space edges you could see. There is a strange note tucked into a few personal letters where settlers mention preferring fires near the doorway even though it meant colder feet. The reasoning was simple. Smoke escaped more easily, fresh air followed, warmth was sacrificed for breath. Sitting here watching the smoke slide out in a thin grey ribbon, you find yourself making the same choice without thinking. The smell of smoke mixes with earth, sharp and dry. It clings to your clothes instantly. You will smell like this for days. People at the time accepted it as normal, the scent of winter survival. There is no perfume strong enough to cover it, no soap that fully removes it. Smoke becomes part of you. You hold your hands out toward the flame, palms open. Heat blooms slowly, painfully at first, then settles into a deep ache. Fingers stiff from digging begin to bend again. You rotate your wrists, feeling circulation return. This small comfort feels enormous after hours of cold. Not everyone agreed on how best to manage indoor fires. Some accounts praise carefully built stone or clay hearths carved directly into dugout floors. Others describe nothing more than a shallow pit scraped into the dirt. The written record offers no single answer, only variations shaped by materials, knowledge and luck. You have no stones, no bricks. You have dirt and attention. It will have to do. You keep the fire modest, feeding it sparingly. Flames rise, then you pull back, letting them settle into glowing embers. This is how heat works here. Slow, patient. Too much too fast invites trouble. You remember reading that some families cooked entirely outdoors in winter just to avoid filling their dugouts with smoke. Tonight you are not cooking, you are only surviving. Light flickers across the ceiling, illuminating the roof poles. Shadows stretch and shrink as the fire breathes. You catch yourself staring, hypnotized. Fire has that effect. It draws focus inward, narrows thought. In a place like this, that narrowing is a relief. There is only warmth, light breath. There is disagreement among modern interpreters about how smoky dugouts truly were. Some descriptions paint them as nearly unbearable. Others describe them as manageable with experience. Sitting here now, you suspect both are true depending on patience. A rushed fire punishes you. A careful one rewards restraint. You notice condensation forming where warm air meets cold earth. Tiny droplets appear, glinting in the firelight. They cling to the walls, then slide slowly downward. Moisture is a constant companion underground. It dampens bedding. It chills bones. Some settlers spread ashes along floors to absorb moisture, a small trick passed quietly between neighbours. You make a mental note, though, tonight you have no spare ashes. The fire settles into a low glow. You let it. This is not a blaze meant to dominate the space. It is a companion, a presence. You inch closer, careful not to crowd it. Your knees warm, your face flushes. Behind you, the dugout remains cool, holding onto the cold the way it holds onto silence. You glance toward the doorway. Smoke drifts steadily outward, thinning as it reaches the night air. Stars flicker beyond, indifferent. You feel oddly connected to them through this narrow opening, as if the fire inside and the cold outside are in conversation. One odd solution, mentioned in a few scattered recollections, is the use of twisted hay, or dried animal dung as fuel when wood ran out. It burned hot and fast, though the smell was unforgettable. Whether it was common or only used in desperation is hard to pin down, but the idea lingers. You wrinkle your nose at the thought and hope your scraps of wood last. As the fire dies down, further light fades with it. Shadows deepen. The dugout begins to return to darkness, but not the same darkness as before. It is softer now, edged with warmth. You let the last embers glow while they can, knowing you will not keep this fire through the night. That would be a gamble you're not willing to take. You nudge dirt over the embers, gently smothering them until only faint red points remain. The smell shifts from smoke to warm earth. Silence creeps back in, broken only by the wind outside and your breathing inside. You sit quietly, eyes adjusting. The dugout holds the heat briefly, a gift that will fade but not vanish entirely. You pull your coat tighter and feel the warmth settle into your bones. Light is gone now. Fire is done. What remains is the memory of warmth and the hope it carries into sleep. With the fire gone, the dugout reveals its true personality. Warmth lingers faintly, but what rises to the front now is smell. Not unpleasant, just unavoidable. Damp soil, crushed grass, old roots disturbed from their long sleep. The scent settles into the space the way fog settles into a valley, filling every low place. You breathe it in without choice, and after a few breaths your body stops questioning it. People who wrote about dugout living often mentioned this smell in passing as if it hardly deserved comment. Letters sent back east talk about cold nights, hard work and homesickness, but the smell of earth indoors is treated as background noise. That tells you something. When everyone shares the same conditions, they stop standing out. Earth becomes the baseline. You shift your position and notice how the floor releases a faint chill upward even after the fire. Cold does not disappear underground. It waits. The air near the ground feels heavier, cooler, carrying the scent more strongly. You lift your chin slightly instinctively, seeking the warmer layer higher up. Dugout dwellers learned this quickly. Heads up, feet warm if possible, bodies adapt to invisible layers. There is a small detail tucked into a few winter recollections where people mention hanging bundles of dried herbs or grasses inside their dugouts, not just for cooking or medicine, but to mask the smell of damp soil. Sage mint whatever could be found. Whether this actually improved air quality or simply comforted the mind is uncertain, but the practice shows how sensitive people were to scent when sight and sound were limited. You press your palm against the wall beside you. It feels cool and slightly slick. Moisture beads there, forming slowly, catching what little light remains. The earth breathes in its own way. Warm air from your body meets cold soil and leaves traces behind. You will wake to dampness no matter how careful you are. This was one of the most common complaints recorded in winter diaries, more frequent even than cold itself. Wet cold is harder to fight. You take a slow breath and let it out through your nose. The smell is strongest at first, then fades into something neutral. The human nose adapts quickly when it has no alternative. This adaptation is quiet and relentless, much like frontier life itself. What once seemed unbearable becomes ordinary in a matter of days. You reach into your pack and pull out whatever fabric you have left, maybe a spare shirt or sack. You lay it down where you plan to sleep, creating a thin barrier between your body and the dirt. It does little for warmth, but it feels important. Clean fabric, even briefly, reminds you of life above ground. Some settlers wrote about spreading newspapers or feed sacks on their dugout floors for the same reason. Not luxury, just separation. The air feels thick, now heavier without the fire drawing it outward. You test it by breathing deeply. It feels safe enough for the moment, but you know it will change through the night. Dugouts needed constant attention to airflow even in winter. Accounts from the time mention people cracking doors or brushing away snow at intervals just to refresh the air. It was a balance between warmth and breath that never fully resolved. There is ongoing disagreement among those who study frontier housing about how unhealthy dugout air truly was. Some medical reports from the period link underground living to respiratory issues. Others suggest those problems were more closely tied to smoke and overcrowding than to the dugouts themselves. Sitting here alone with the fire out and the doorway partly open, you feel the air settle into something tolerable, if not fresh. You shift again and hear a faint sound, almost like a whisper. It takes a moment to realize it is the walls themselves. Tiny movements as soil contracts in the cold, barely audible, but constant. The dugout is not silent, it just speaks softly. This sound becomes part of the night, something you will stop noticing after a while. Your clothes smell of smoke now layered over earth. It is a sharp combination, but oddly grounding. People often associate scent with memory, and this smell would have marked winters for those who lived here. Years later, a whiff of damp soil or wood smoke could bring it all rushing back. Cold nights, low ceilings, the sense of being held by the land. You lean back and let your shoulders relax. Tension drains slowly, not because conditions have improved, but because fighting them no longer helps. Acceptance becomes its own form of rest. The dugout smells like the ground because it is the ground. There is no pretending otherwise. You notice how the smell changes slightly as the night deepens. Cooler air carries less moisture. This scent sharpens, becomes cleaner, almost metallic. Snow outside absorbs sound and scent alike, creating a kind of vacuum. Inside, everything feels contained, sealed in with you. One peculiar habit mentioned in a handful of personal notes is that some people sprinkled sand or fine gravel along their dugout floors to reduce mud and odour. It helped with traction and absorbed some moisture, though it also made sleeping rougher. Comfort was always a trade. You imagine the grit under blankets and decide you would rather deal with damp than abrasion. You draw your knees closer to your chest and tuck your chin down. Your breath warms the space immediately in front of your face. This pocket of warmth feels precious. You breathe slowly, rhythmically, letting the smell fade into the background of your awareness. The dugout has a presence now, not threatening, just steady. The smell, the cool walls, the muted sounds all blend into a single sensation. Enclosure, protection, limitation, all at once. You think briefly about how different this would feel with another person here. More warmth, less air, more noise. Families adapted to that balance too, sharing small spaces through long winters. Some accounts describe the dugout as stifling when full, others as comfortingly close. Perspective shifts with need. For now you're alone with the smell of earth. It is honest. It does not pretend to be anything else. As your breathing slows, your body accepts it as the scent of shelter. The ground beneath you is not clean, not dry, not kind, but it is holding, and tonight that is enough. You start assembling what passes for a bed and the word feels generous. This is not a mattress. It is a negotiation between cold ground and tired bones. You pull together what you have: hay spare clothing, maybe a blanket that has already seen too many winters. Each layer is chosen with care, not for comfort but for separation. Even an inch between you and the dirt matters more than softness ever could. Settlers across the plains relied heavily on hay and straw for bedding during winter, especially in sod houses and dugouts. Farm records and household inventories from the period often list straw not just for animals, but explicitly for sleeping. It trapped air, added insulation, and could be replaced when it grew too damp. That detail appears so often it becomes almost invisible, but here, kneeling on the floor, you understand its importance immediately. You spread the hay first, fluffing it as much as stiff, cold stalks will allow. It smells dry and faintly sweet beneath the heavier scent of soil. The sound it makes as you arrange it is soft, whispery, a relief after the scrape of digging. You press down with your hand and feel it spring back slightly. That resistance feels like a promise. Over that you lay whatever fabric you have left. A blanket if you're lucky, a coat if you're not. You hesitate before using the coat. It is your protection when you move. But once you lie down, movement will be minimal. You decide warmth now matters more than later. You spread it flat, smoothing wrinkles with numb fingers. There is a small but telling detail in some winter letters where people describe stuffing spare clothing into cracks or using it as padding beneath their hips and shoulders. Clothes were not just worn. They were tools. Nothing had a single purpose. You roll a shirt into a rough pillow shape and set it aside, imagining your head resting there later. You lower yourself onto the bedding, slowly testing it. The hay crackles, faintly shifting under your weight. Cold pushes up from below immediately, but muted. Not gone, just dulled. You adjust your position, sliding an inch to the left, then right, searching for the least punishing spot. Sleep here is about compromise. You lie on your side, first knees drawn slightly toward your chest. This position keeps your core warmer and reduces contact with the ground. People slept this way instinctively long before anyone talked about sleep posture. Your body curls in on itself, conserving heat. You pull the blanket or coat up around your shoulders and feel fabric brush your chin. The dugout ceiling looms close above you now. Lying down makes the space feel larger in one way and smaller in another. Your eyes track the roof poles, barely visible in the darkness. Shadows cling to them, unmoving. You remind yourself they are solid. You already tested them, still trust comes slowly. There is disagreement among historians about how well people actually slept in dugouts during winter. Some accounts describe deep, heavy sleep born of exhaustion. Others mention constant waking, shifting to chase warmth, listening for sounds. Both can be true. Sleep is shaped as much by expectation as by environment. Tonight you're too tired to argue with your body. You reach down and tuck loose hay around your hips and thighs, filling gaps where cold sneaks in. This is a learned motion, one repeated night after night by people who lived this way. Bedding was not static. It was adjusted constantly like a living thing. You feel a small satisfaction as the cold recedes just a bit. The smell of hay mixes with earth and smoke, creating a layered scent that feels strangely calming. It reminds you of barns of animals settling in for the night. That association is not accidental. People slept near livestock for warmth, when they could sharing body heat across species. Here you borrow only the smell and the memory. You settle back and listen. The wind outside has softened, or perhaps you're just less aware of it now. The dugout walls absorb sound, turning sharp gusts into low murmurs. This muffled world makes time feel thicker, slower. Minutes stretch. Thoughts loosen. A curious habit mentioned in some frontier recollections is that people often slept with their heads toward the back wall and feet toward the entrance. The reason was practical. Fresh air entered near the door and smoke lingered higher up and farther back. Positioning mattered. You adjust slightly, aligning your body with this logic. Your feet feel colder almost immediately, but your breath feels easier. You pull the blanket higher, tucking it around your neck. Fabric rustles softly. The sound feels loud in the quiet space, then fades. You focus on your breathing, slow and deliberate. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Each breath warms the air just in front of your face. There is no single answer among researchers about whether bedding materials made a significant difference in dugout warmth. Some argue insulation mattered less than overall shelter design. Others point to detailed accounts describing specific combinations of hay hides and blankets that improve sleep dramatically. Lying here now, you're firmly on the side of anything helps. Your body begins to sink slightly into the bedding as it compresses under your weight. This creates a shallow nest holding warmth closer. You resist the urge to shift too much. Movement lets heat escape. Stillness keeps it. You close your eyes and feel the ceiling just beyond your vision. The earth above you is quiet, heavy, reliable. That thought steadies you. You're not exposed to the sky tonight. Snow can fall, wind can scream. You're tucked into the ground like a seed. Your fingers curl and uncurl, once then relax. Toes ache faintly, then settle into numbness that is not yet painful. You file that sensation away, something to monitor later. Dugout sleep required awareness even while resting. People learned to wake before cold became dangerous. The smell of hay grows stronger as it warms, releasing oils trapped in dry stems. It is comforting, almost sweet. You breathe it in and let your thoughts wander briefly. You imagine others lying like this across the plains, thousands of small shelters, dotted under snow, each holding a human trying to rest. You shift your head onto the rolled shirt. It is lumpy and uneven, but it lifts your face just enough that your neck relaxes. You sigh quietly. That sound feels too loud, then disappears into the earth. The dugout holds steady. No dirt falls. No pole creaks. Silence settles in layers. This is not the sleep of a soft bed or a warm room. It is a cautious truce between body and environment. You accept the terms. As your breathing slows further, the details blur. The smell fades into background. The cold becomes an idea more than a sensation. Wrapped in hay and earth, you let yourself sink into stillness, knowing that even here, even now, sleep can come. You lie still for a long moment, letting the dugout settle around you, and then you realize how much you are listening. Sleep does not arrive all at once here. It approaches cautiously, testing the space the way you did earlier. Every sound feels amplified, not louder, exactly, just closer. The earth presses in, and with it comes a heightened awareness of what moves and what stays still. Above you, wine drags itself across the prairie. It does not howl anymore, it scrapes. A low, uneven sound, like something heavy being pulled slowly over stone. Snow shifts somewhere on the roof, a soft slide followed by silence. You hold your breath without meaning to, then let it out when nothing follows. This is the rhythm of the night. Anticipation, pause, release. People who slept in dugouts often wrote about how the land never fully went quiet in winter. Even when storms passed, there were always small sounds. Ice contracting, grass bending under snow, soil tightening as temperatures dropped. These were not noises that signaled danger, but your body does not always know the difference. You lie there, muscles half ready, half resting. Your bedding rustles faintly as you adjust one shoulder. Hay shifts settling under your weight. The sound feels loud in the enclosed space, then fades quickly. You remind yourself that stillness is warmth. Every movement lets heat escape. You tuck your hands closer to your chest and curl slightly tighter, finding a position that holds heat without straining joints. The dugout ceiling seems closer now that you are horizontal. You can sense it rather than see it, a presence hovering just beyond reach. Some people found this comforting, like being under thick blankets. Others found it oppressive. Tonight it feels neutral to you, not friendly, not hostile, just there. Your breath fogs faintly in front of your face, then disappears. You fall into a slow rhythm, counting breaths without meaning to. In, out, in, out. Each one warms the small pocket of air you occupy. This pocket becomes your world. Beyond it, cold waits patiently. There is an odd calm that comes from knowing you cannot improve things right now. The digging is done. The roof holds. The fire is out. Bedding is arranged. You have reached the limit of control. That acceptance loosens something inside you. You stop planning and start resting. Outside, a distant sound reaches you. A single sharp yip, then another farther off. Coyotes. Their calls carry easily over snow. People living on the plains were intimately familiar with these sounds, often noting them in journals as markers of nightfall. You listen until the calls fade, swallowed by distance. They are not a threat to you here, but they remind you how thin the walls are between worlds. The dugout responds to temperature changes in subtle ways. As the night grows colder, the soil contracts slightly. You hear a faint tick, then another. Not cracking, just settling. This is the earth adjusting itself. You tense briefly, then relax when nothing follows. Over time, these sounds become familiar, almost reassuring. The dugout is alive in its own slow way. Your feet ache, then slowly go numb. You shift them once just enough to bring a whisper of warmth back, then still them again. People learn this balance through experience. Move too much and you chill. Move too little and circulation suffers. Sleep becomes a careful dance even while unconscious. You think briefly about how many people slept like this night after night through entire winters. Not as a novelty, not as an experiment, but as routine. Children fell asleep to these sounds. Adults woke to them. Life folded itself into spaces like this without ceremony. That thought brings a strange sense of continuity, as if you are borrowing someone else's night. There is a story mentioned in one winter letter about a family who learned to tell time by the sounds outside their dugout. Wind patterns changed near midnight. Ice shifted differently before dawn. Without clocks, the land became the schedule. Lying here now, you find yourself wondering how long it has been since you lay down. Time stretches and blurs unmarked by light. Your breathing deepens, muscles soften despite the cold. This is the body taking over, insisting on rest even when conditions are imperfect. Sleep here is not luxurious. It is functional, a tool for survival. The doorway remains a darker rectangle against darkness. Occasionally a faint glimmer of starlight sneaks in as clouds shift. It is enough to remind you that the world still exists beyond the dirt walls. That knowledge steadies you. You are sheltered, not buried. At some point you notice that the cold no longer feels aggressive. It is present, yes, but not biting. The dugout has done its job. The earth holds temperature more steadily than open air. This was one of the reasons people trusted underground shelters during brutal winters, even when they disliked everything else about them. Warmth here is relative, but relative warmth is enough. You drift closer to sleep, thoughts losing their edges. Sounds blend together. Wind becomes breath. Earth movement becomes background hum. The smell of hay and soil fades into something neutral, almost comforting. Your senses dull just enough to let go. There is a brief moment when you half wake unsure why. Nothing has changed. No sound, no movement. Just the body checking in. You resettle, pulling the blanket tighter around your shoulders. Fabric warms quickly against your skin. Sleep comes in pieces at first. Short stretches of darkness broken by awareness. This is normal here. People wrote about this fragmented rest, about waking often, but still feeling rested enough by morning. Sleep didn't need to be continuous to be effective. It just needed to happen. You let yourself sink again. Breathing slows further. The dugout holds steady. Snow continues to fall outside, softening the world even more. You are wrapped in earth, insulated by dirt, hay, and fatigue. Eventually the listening fades. The sounds do not stop, you simply stop tracking them. Consciousness loosens its grip. Thoughts thin out, then dissolve entirely. For now you are asleep underground, held by the prairie in winter. The night stretches on above you, but you no longer measure it. You rest where the land allows rest, and that is enough. You wake without fully waking the way you do when cold presses its hand against your shoulder. There is no alarm, no sound sharp enough to name. Just a sense that something has changed. The air feels heavier on your face. Your breath fogs longer before fading. Cold has been busy while you slept. You stay still, at first testing the moment. Moving too quickly wastes what little warmth you have built. You listen again, but the night has softened. Wind still moves above you, but it no longer scrapes. It sighs. Snow continues its quiet work, settling into every hollow, sealing the world tighter. The dugout feels more insulated now, the earth wrapped in a thicker blanket than before. Cold behaves differently down here. It does not rush in or strike all at once. It creeps. It finds edges, ankles, fingertips, the hollow at the base of your spine. You feel it exploring patiently, waiting for you to forget it is there. People who lived through these winters learned quickly that cold was not an enemy you fought. It was a presence you managed. You pull your hands closer to your chest, tucking fingers into sleeves. The fabric is cool at first, then slowly warms. Heat moves reluctantly, like a favour granted rather than a right. You breathe steadily, resisting the urge to shiver. Shivering burns energy. Energy is precious. You remember reading how people described cold as something that soaked into the body rather than sitting on the skin. That description feels accurate now. It seeps through layers, through hay, through bones settling deep. This is why winter nights felt longer underground. The cold was not dramatic. It was persistent. Some old medical notes from frontier settlements mention how people slept in short bursts during extreme cold waking, often to adjust bedding or simply move enough to keep circulation going. You understand this now without needing instruction. You flex your toes slowly, then still them again, just enough to remind them you're still here. The walls feel colder when you brush against them, even through fabric. The moisture there has chilled further beads, now slick and icy. You avoid contact shifting inward toward the center of your bedding. The dugout floor feels harder now that your body has compressed the hay. Insulation improves with fluff, not weight. You reach down and pull loose stalks back under your hip, restoring a little loft. Cold also changes sound. Everything feels sharper, more brittle. When snow slides off the roof outside, the sound cracks the quiet like a snapped twig. You tense, then relax when the ceiling does not respond. You remind yourself again that the roof held earlier, it is still holding now. There is a detail mentioned in several winter accounts where people described how the cold made time feel stretched, even warped. Minutes felt long, hours felt endless. Lying here half awake, you cannot tell how long you've been drifting in and out. It could be moments, it could be hours. The dugout offers no clues. You breathe into your hands, warming them, then press them briefly against your thighs. Heat transfers slowly, but it transfers. This is the kind of knowledge people learned without naming it. Body heat was currency. You spent it carefully. There is still no full agreement among those who study frontier survival about how much protection dugouts actually provided during the coldest nights. Some winter temperatures dropped far below anything most people experience today, and survival often depended on layers, food and luck as much as shelter. Lying here now, you feel grateful for every small advantage the earth offers, even if it is not complete protection. Your face feels exposed. You pull the blanket higher, leaving only your nose and mouth free. Fabric brushes your cheeks rough but welcome. You turn your head slightly, finding a position where your breath warms the air without dampening the blanket too much. Moisture freezes fast here. Your thoughts drift briefly unfocused. You imagine the surface above you, moonlight on snow, the vast stillness of the prairie. Underground you are spared the worst of it, but you can sense it all the same. The land presses down with cold weight, but also with steadiness. There is an odd comfort in knowing that the cold is shared. Somewhere nearby, other dugouts, cabins and tents hold other sleepers making the same small adjustments. People waking briefly, shifting, tucking breathing warmth into their hands. Winter binds them together invisibly. Your breathing slows again as your body finds a new equilibrium. Not warm, just stable. The cold stops advancing for now. You let that be enough. Sleep returns not smoothly, but in layers. You drift, wake, drift again. Each time you surface, the dugout is the same. Wall steady, roof intact, doorway dark. That consistency matters more than comfort. Eventually awareness thins. The cold remains, but it fades into the background, no longer demanding constant attention. Your body sinks deeper into the bedding, conserving what it can. You sleep again this time, more fully wrapped in earth and patience. Cold continues its slow work outside and within, but for now you and the dugout have reached an understanding. The night goes on and you rest inside it. You surface into awareness again, not because of cold this time, but because of sound. It slips into your sleep quietly, then grows just enough to pull you up. At first you cannot place it. It is not wind exactly, not an animal either. It is the land itself speaking in winter tones you're still learning to understand. You lie still listening. Somewhere nearby ice shifts within the soil. The sound is low and brief, like a knuckle cracking beneath a blanket. Then silence returns. Moments later another sound follows, a faint creak above you, as the roof responds to the weight of snow settling unevenly. Your chest tightens, then eases when nothing else happens. People who live through prairie winters learn to catalogue these noises without realising they were doing it. Journals from the period are full of small descriptions that mean nothing on their own but paint a clear picture together. Boards complaining in the cold, sod sighing, snow whispering as it slid and packed. Night was never silent, it was just restrained. You shift your head slightly on your makeshift pillow. The hay beneath you rustles dry and brittle. That sound feels safe. It is yours. Everything else belongs to the land. You focus on the familiar noises letting them anchor you. Outside, something moves. You hear a soft crunch, then another. Footsteps. Light ones. Too light for a horse, too deliberate for drifting snow. You freeze breath held halfway in. This is where imagination wakes faster than reason. Then the sound stops. A pause stretches. You listen harder, heart thudding. Nothing follows. After a moment you exhale slowly. Probably a fox or a rabbit crossing the drifted ground. Small animals stayed active through winter, their movements etched sharply into the snow. People often wrote about how wildlife seemed closer at night, their sounds carrying farther in the cold air. You remind yourself that the dugout walls packed thick and solid are not easy to breach. Animals tend to avoid enclosed human spaces anyway. Still, your body stays alert for a while longer. Sleep loosens but does not fully return yet. Another sound reaches you more distant. A long low call that rises and falls. Wolves this time. Not close, but close enough to recognise. Their voices echo across the plains, stretching space in strange ways. One voice becomes many, then fades again. You have no fire burning, no light to betray you. The dugout remains just another mound beneath the snow. In letters written during long winters, people often mentioned wolves without fear, just familiarity. They were part of the soundscape, like wind or creaking ice. Dangerous at times, yes, but not constant threats. Listening now, you feel that same uneasy acceptance. The sound belongs out there, not in here. The dugout responds to these outside noises by staying stubbornly quiet. Walls hold. Roof stays firm. The earth does not echo the howls. That separation is important. It tells your nervous system where you are. You roll onto your other side slowly, careful not to disturb your bedding too much. The floor feels colder on this side, or maybe your body is simply cooled unevenly. You tuck loose hay back into place, restoring the barrier between you and the dirt. This movement feels practiced, now automatic. There is a brief sharp sound above you as snow slides off part of the roof and lands outside. It is louder than before a sudden release. You flinch despite yourself. Then nothing, no collapse, no follow-up, just the quiet settling of the land again. Some people later wrote that this was the hardest part of sleeping underground. Not the cold, not the discomfort, but learning to trust unfamiliar sounds. Every noise feels like a question. Is this normal? Is this the moment something goes wrong? Over time, experience answered most of those questions, but the first nights were always the longest. You focus on your breathing again, slow and steady. The dugout smells faintly of damp soil and hay. That scent is consistent now, unchanged by the sounds outside. Consistency is calming. You let it wash over you. A softer sound follows, barely noticeable. Snow falling from a grass stem near the entrance. A whisper, then nothing. Your body stays relaxed this time. You do not tense. That feels like progress. The night stretches on. Sounds come and go, each one brief, each one resolved by silence. You begin to recognize patterns. Wind first, snow second, land adjusting third. Animals pass through without lingering. Nothing presses against the walls, nothing scratches at the door. Eventually the sounds blur into a single background presence, like distant traffic in a city you no longer think about. Your mind stops tagging each noise as important. Sleep edges closer again. You adjust your shoulders and let your head settle. The dugout holds steady around you, absorbing sound and fear alike. The world above remains active, alive, unpredictable. Down here, things move slowly. Your breathing deepens. Muscles release their last bit of tension. The noises continue, but they no longer pull you upward. They drift past your awareness instead. Wrapped in earth and darkness, you let the night speak without answering it. Sleep returns, carrying you gently while winter continues its quiet work outside. You wake to the quiet shock of cold air on your face, sharper than before, crisp enough that it feels clean. Your eyelashes cling together for a moment when you blink, stiff with frost. It surprises you every time, even though part of you expected it. You breathe out slowly and watch the cloud hang brighter now in the faint grey light leaking through the doorway. Condensation has done its work while you slept. The walls glitter softly, tiny beads of moisture frozen in place, catching what little light there is. When you shift a few of them, release and slide downward, leaving thin, dark trails behind. The earth looks different like this, decorated briefly by the cold. It is almost beautiful if you ignore what it means for your comfort. You sit up carefully, joints protesting. The ceiling feels closer when you move too quickly, so you slow down, letting your head adjust. Cold settles differently when you sit. It drops onto your shoulders like a shawl you did not ask for. You pull your blanket tighter and rub your hands together, feeling stiffness slowly give way to sensation. Breathing feels easier now. The air is colder but fresher. Overnight snow has sealed small gaps around the entrance, quieting drafts, but also changing how air moves. Dugout mornings often felt like this, sharper and clearer than the nights, as if the shelter exhaled everything it had been holding. You inhale deeply, tasting earth and winter together. You reach out and touch the wall beside you. The surface is icy smooth in places where moisture froze cleanly. Your fingers sting immediately. You pull back and tuck your hands into your sleeves, smiling faintly at yourself. The dugout reminds you who sets the rules. As light grows, the space reveals its imperfections. Hay is flattened where you slept, darker where dampness crept in. Your blanket smells stronger now, earth and smoke layered together. You shake it gently, releasing a puff of cold air and dust, then spread it again to dry as much as it can. Drying indoors is a generous word. You're really just giving moisture somewhere else to go. People who lived this way learned to read these small morning signs the way others read clocks. Frost on the walls meant the night had been particularly cold. Damp bedding meant you needed more airflow today. Clear air meant the fire had gone out early enough. You take these cues in without naming them, already adjusting your plans. You shift toward the entrance and peer out. The prairie beyond is pale and still, snow stretched smooth and unbroken in every direction. Light reflects upward, filling the dugout with a soft glow that feels almost warm despite the temperature. The world looks quieter in daylight, less threatening. Sounds that felt ominous at night now seem ordinary. You crawl closer and brush snow away from the doorway with your glove, careful not to open it too wide all at once. Cold rushes in eagerly, reminding you that shelter works best when respected. You pause, letting the air exchange slowly, then open it a bit more. Freshness spills inside, carrying the faint scent of distant grass buried beneath snow. You notice your breath no longer fogs as thickly once the air mixes. That balance matters. Too sealed and the dugout feels stale. Too open and it bleeds warmth. This is the quiet work of mornings underground, adjusting invisible lines. A faint crack sounds behind you as a frozen bead of condensation finally drops from the wall and hits the floor. It startles you, then makes you laugh under your breath. Even the earth wakes slowly. You take inventory of yourself. Fingers tingling but responsive. Toes cold but moving. No sharp pain. No numbness that lingers. These checks become habitual. Winter nights taught people to assess their bodies honestly each morning. Pride had no place here. You stretch carefully, rolling your shoulders, bending your knees. The space allows just enough movement if you're mindful. Your breath deepens as muscles loosen. Heat builds, slowly generated from within rather than borrowed from fire. The light strengthens as the sun climbs higher, though you cannot see it directly. The dugout brightens in patches, shadows retreating into corners. You realize how much you missed light while sleeping. Darkness presses differently underground. Daylight feels like permission. You brush frost from your hair and collar, sending tiny crystals tumbling to the floor. They melt almost immediately, darkening the dirt. Moisture never rests here. It just changes form. You sit quietly for a moment, letting the morning settle. The dugout has held through the night. That fact carries weight. Trust builds slowly, night by night, until the shelter feels less like an experiment and more like a place. Outside the prairie waits vast and indifferent. Inside the earth holds you close. You gather your blanket, shake it once more, and prepare to face the day, knowing that tonight you will return here again. The dugout has earned that expectation. You move slowly into the morning because underground mornings demand patience. Every action sends a message to cold muscles and stiff joints, and they answer in their own time. You roll your shoulders again, then your neck, listening to the faint pops and sighs that follow. The dugout smells sharper now, cleaner than it did last night, as if the cold scrubbed it while you slept. Chores come first, even before warmth. You push yourself up onto your knees and begin tidying the space, not because it looks messy, but because order matters here. Loose hay gets shaken and spread to dry where light can reach it. Damp patches on the floor are scraped away and replaced with drier dirt from the edge. These small tasks were part of daily life for people who lived this way. Morning maintenance kept problems from growing quietly into disasters. You brush dirt from your clothes, sending fine dust drifting through the light. It sparkles briefly, then settles. Your hands move automatically now, already learning the rhythm of this place. The dugout teaches quickly. Ignore it and it punishes you. Attend to it and it gives you a little grace. Cold still clings to your fingers, but movement brings heat back faster than fire ever could. You squat and stand a few times, feeling blood return. This kind of movement was common in winter routines, though no one would have called it exercise. It was simply what kept bodies working when days were short and shelters tight. You glance toward the doorway again, checking the snowbank that formed overnight. It has settled firmly, doing exactly what you hoped. Wind slipped over it instead of through it. You dig out just enough to keep the opening clear, careful not to undo the insulation it provides. Snow works best when you let it stay where it wants. You reach for your pack and take stock of supplies. Not much has changed since last night, but looking matters. It reassures you that nothing vanished in the dark. People often wrote about this habit, counting and recounting what they had, especially in winter. Scarcity sharpens attention. Your stomach tightens with hunger now that the night has passed. Cold burns fuel even when you sleep. You think about food, about how much effort it will take to prepare anything warm. Many mornings in dugouts began this way, with a quiet debate between hunger and the work required to satisfy it. Sometimes people chose to wait, saving fuel and energy for later. Sometimes they did not. You decide to move a little more before eating, letting your body warm naturally. You step outside, briefly, boots crunching on snow. The cold hits harder in daylight, no longer softened by sleep. Your breath catches, then steadies. The prairie stretches out, bright and unforgiving, but beautiful in its own stark way. You turn back toward the dugout quickly, not lingering. Outside is for work and travel. Inside is for survival. You duck back down, brushing snow from your sleeves as you go. Back in the shelter, you notice how much quieter it feels now. Daytime quiet is different from night quiet. Less tense, more settled. The land is awake, but not watchful. You sit near the wall and let that feeling sink in. You reach down and adjust your bedding again, fluffing hay, spreading fabric so it can dry as much as possible. Dampness never fully leaves, but you can keep it from winning. People developed countless small habits like this, each one barely noticeable on its own, but together they made winter livable. Your hands find a familiar ache as you work, a reminder of yesterday's digging. It is not unpleasant. It tells you that your body did what it needed to do. You pause, resting your hands on your knees, breathing evenly. Light shifts across the floor as the sun climbs higher. Shadows retreat, then reform in new places. Time passes differently underground, measured by light angles and body signals rather than clocks. You note it without effort. Before settling fully into the day, you take one last moment to sit quietly. The dugout holds steady. Walls firm, roof unchanged, doorway manageable. That inventory matters. It sets the tone for everything that follows. You lean back slightly, feeling the earth support you, and let the morning routine come to a close. The hardest part of the night is behind you. The day brings its own challenges, but for now you are warm enough, awake enough, and ready to move forward, step by careful step beneath the winter sky. Hunger settles in more firmly now, not sharp, just steady like another layer of cold you have to account for. Your body spent the night burning fuel to stay alive, and it wants that debt repaid. You open your pack slowly, already knowing what is inside, but checking anyway. Checking is part of the ritual. Food here is not just sustenance, it is reassurance. You take out what you have set aside for winter mornings, something dense, something that will not freeze solid beyond use. People who lived through these seasons learned quickly which food survived cold and which betrayed you. Bread turned to stone. Potatoes cracked and went sweet in a way that was not pleasant. Salt pork stayed reliable. Dried beans waited patiently. Flour became precious, not because it was rare, but because it could become so many things. You sit on your heels and consider the effort required to make anything warm. Fire means smoke. Smoke means opening the doorway wider. Opening the doorway means inviting the cold back in. Many winter mornings, people chose to eat cold food simply to avoid that trade. You weigh the same choice now, stomach tightening as you do. You decide on something small, enough to take the edge off. You break it carefully, listening to the brittle sound it makes in the cold air. You chew slowly, letting warmth spread from your core outward as your body recognizes fuel. Even cold food helps once it is inside you. That realization feels almost disappointing, as if warmth should require more ceremony than this. You notice how your breath steadies as you eat. Energy returns in subtle ways. Fingers move more easily. Thoughts sharpen just a little. This is why winter routines always revolved around food, not abundance, consistency. There is a quiet habit that shows up in old winter routines where people saved their warm meals for midday when the sun offered at least the illusion of help. Morning food was often simple and quick eaten standing or crouched with gloves still on. You understand the logic immediately. Save the work for when the day is already working with you. You wipe your hands on your trousers and tuck the remaining food away carefully. Crumbs matter. Smells matter. Anything that might attract animals gets sealed tight or buried deep in the pack. Dugouts did not stop mice, and winter drove small creatures to take chances they would not take in warmer months. You scan the corners briefly, then relax. Nothing has moved. You reach for your water and hesitate. Liquid behaves strangely in this cold. Ice forms from the edges inward, leaving a slush that looks drinkable, but numbs your mouth instantly. You take a small sip anyway, teeth aching as cold bites. Hydration matters even when thirst hides behind cold. After eating, you shift your attention back to the space itself. Food always leaves traces, a smell, a crumb. You brush the floor lightly, clearing anything that fell. Cleanliness here is not about comfort. It is about control. Your stomach settles as you sit back, knees drawn up. Warmth builds, slowly helped by digestion. It is one of the few ways your body generates heat without movement. You savor that quiet warmth, letting it spread. You think about how winter storage shaped daily life. Supplies had to be kept from freezing solid, from spoiling, from being stolen by animals. Dugouts were sometimes used as storage spaces themselves, their stable temperatures helping preserve food. Other times, food was buried in pits outside, marked carefully so snow did not erase their location. Both methods had risks. Forget where you buried something, and it might as well not exist. You glanced toward the doorway again, mentally mapping the area outside. If you needed to bury food later, where would you choose? Somewhere shaded, somewhere easy to find, somewhere that would not flood come spring. Even now your mind works ahead. Winter trains it to. You adjust your posture, stretching your legs out briefly, then drawing them back in. The dugout feels slightly warmer now, or perhaps you're just better fed. The difference is hard to separate. In winter, cause and effect blur together. You sit quietly for a few moments, listening again. Daytime sounds are faint but present. Snow shifting as it warms. A distant bird call thin and brief. Life continues even when it feels paused. With hunger eased your thoughts slow again. The urgency of the morning fades, replaced by a steady readiness. You're not comfortable, but you are functional, in this place that counts as success. You gather your things and settle back against the wall, letting the warmth from your body linger in the small space. Food stored, body fed, dugout intact. These are the measures that matter today. As the morning moves on, you feel prepared to face what comes next, knowing that when the day ends you will return here again. The dugout waits patiently, holding your place beneath the winter plains. As the day stretches on, you begin to feel the weight of distance. Not measured in miles, but in silence. The prairie outside remains wide and pale, a single, uninterrupted thought. Snow smooths everything into sameness, erasing paths, fences, even the subtle signs that someone else has ever passed this way. From inside the dugout, the world feels both close and impossibly far. You step outside again briefly, more out of habit than need. The cold greets you like an old acquaintance, brisk and unapologetic. You scan the horizon instinctively, though you already know what you'll see. Nothing moves, no smoke, no figures, just land and sky meeting in a line so clean it feels deliberate. In winter, neighbours become ideas rather than realities. You duck back underground, brushing snow from your shoulders, and the dugout closes around you once more. The contrast is immediate. Outside, space stretches endlessly. Inside, it compresses into something manageable. This push and pull shapes your thoughts. Too much openness unsettles you. Too much enclosure weighs on you. You learn to move between them carefully. Isolation here is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It accumulates quietly hour by hour. With no visitors and no clear markers of time, your mind begins to circle inward. People who live like this often fill the silence with routine. Same tasks, same order. Predictability became companionship. You rearrange a few items near the wall, not because they need it, but because your hands want something to do. Touch grounds you. The wall feels cold but solid. The floor responds to pressure without complaint. The dugout answers consistency with steadiness. You sit back and listen again, not for danger but for presence. The faintest sounds reach you. Wind slipping over the hill, snow melting and refreezing with tiny clicks. A bird passes overhead, its wings cutting the air briefly. These small signs remind you that life continues even when it feels paused. Your thoughts wander to people you have not seen in days, maybe weeks. Faces blur. Voices lose detail. Winter did this to people thinning social connections until memory had to fill the gaps. Some found this peaceful, others found it unbearable. Sitting here now, you feel both possibilities tug at you. You imagine another dugout somewhere beyond the rise, someone else moving quietly through their own routines. Maybe they are mending a boot. Maybe they are stirring a pot. The image comforts you even if it is invented. Isolation makes the imagination work harder. You lie back again on your bedding, not to sleep but to rest your mind. Staring up at the low ceiling, you trace patterns in the dirt lines left by your shovel shadows, cast by uneven surfaces. These details become familiar quickly. They give your eyes somewhere to land. Time slows underground. Without the sun in your direct view, hours stretch and compress unpredictably. You might think it has been a long while only to find little has changed. or you might be surprised by how quickly light fades again. People learn to stop fighting this. The dugout had its own rhythm. You adjust your position and feel a faint warmth linger where your body was before. Heat here is personal and temporary. You create it, and then you move on. The space does not hold it for you. This teaches you to stay still longer than feels natural. A small sound startles you, not outside this time, but inside. A faint scuttle near the wall. You freeze listening. It stops, then resumes farther away. Likely a mouse drawn by warmth and the promise of crumbs. Dugouts were never sealed worlds. Life slipped in through gaps no one could fully close. You sit up slowly and tap the wall with your knuckles. The sound travels dull and short. The scuttle stops again. You exhale and relax. This is not fear. It is negotiation. You share this space whether you want to or not. You think about how nights like this stretched for months. How the sameness could either soothe or suffocate. Some people kept journals just to hear their own thoughts echoed back. Others stopped writing altogether, saving energy for tasks that mattered more directly. Words cost something in winter. You shift closer to the wall and rest your back against it. The pressure feels grounding. Earth does not move easily. It does not rush. That steadiness transfers to you in small ways. Your breathing slows, your shoulders drop. The dugout becomes more than shelter at this point. It becomes a boundary. Inside is manageable. Outside is effort. You choose inside more often, not out of fear, but efficiency. Winter rewards conservation. Light begins to change again, though subtly. The grey outside deepens. The day prepares to fold back into night. You feel it before you see it, a quiet shift in temperature and tone. Evening approaches without ceremony. You take stock again. Food remains. Bedding is dry enough. Walls are intact. Roof unchanged. These checks punctuate the day, anchoring you in the present. Without them, thoughts drift too far. As isolation settles in more firmly, you notice your inner voice growing louder. Thoughts replay themselves. Memories surface uninvited. You let them come and go without chasing them. The dugout teaches you that attention is a limited resource. Spend it carefully. You draw your blanket closer and sit quietly as the last of the light fades. Outside, the prairie prepares for another cold night. Inside, you prepare yourself. The distance from others feels vast, but the distance from the earth feels small. That balance holds you. When darkness finally settles again, it feels familiar now, not new. The dugout has absorbed another day. You have absorbed its lessons. Isolation remains, but it no longer presses as sharply. You're learning how to exist within it one quiet hour at a time. By the time evening settles in again, your body feels the strain of the cold in quieter ways. Not sharp pain, not panic, just a dull heaviness that lingers behind the eyes and in the joints. You notice it when you stand too quickly, or when your hands take a moment longer to obey you. This is how sickness begins here, not with drama, but with small delays. You sit back against the wall and take stock of yourself the same way people learn to do every day in winter. Throat feels dry, head feels clear enough. Limbs respond when asked. You listen inward because out here ignoring early signs was a mistake you didn't get to make twice. Rest was not a luxury. It was maintenance. Underground shelters had a strange relationship with illness. On one hand, they protected you from wind and exposure. On the other, dampness and limited airflow could linger around you like a fog. You feel that balance now. The dugout keeps you alive, but it does not make you strong on its own. Your body has to meet it halfway. You lie down earlier than you planned, not because you're sleepy, but because being horizontal costs less energy. Your bedding still smells faintly of hay and earth, familiar now. You pull the blanket up and let your muscles loosen. This kind of rest is deliberate. You're not surrendering to sleep. You're giving your body time to recover. Breathing slowly, you notice how your chest rises and falls. Each breath feels slightly heavier than it did in the morning. Not alarming, just noticeable. Cold air does that. It tightens things. People who lived like this learned to pace themselves carefully, taking breaks even when work was unfinished. Overexertion in winter often led to long recovery if recovery came at all. You close your eyes and let the darkness come without resistance. The dugout feels still settled. Outside, sounds are faint again, muted by snow and distance. Inside, your heartbeat is the loudest thing for a while. Steady, reliable. You focus on that rhythm. Sleep does not come immediately. Instead, you drift into a light rest, aware but unbothered. Thoughts surface and fade without grabbing hold. You think about how people cared for themselves when doctors were far away and weather made travel impossible. Warmth, rest, simple food, time. It was not sophisticated, but it worked often enough. Your body shifts on its own, finding a position that eases pressure on your joints, knees slightly bent, arms tucked close. You feel the bedding compress and hold you. The floor beneath remains cold but distant, buffered by layers and familiarity. At some point you notice a faint ache behind your eyes. You open them briefly, then close them again. No light has changed. Nothing needs attention. You let the ache exist without reacting to it. Worry burns energy you cannot spare. Moisture gathers slowly on the walls again as your breath warms the air. You hear the soft, almost imperceptible sound of a droplet forming then sliding. It reminds you that the dugout never fully rests either. Everything here is in motion, just very slowly. You think about how recovery worked in winter. People slept more, moved less, accepted a slower pace. Productivity was measured differently. Simply making it through the season intact was an achievement. Lying here now, you allow yourself that same standard. Your breathing deepens, muscles soften further. The ache recedes to the background. Sleep finally takes hold, not sudden, but layered, settling over you like another blanket. You dream lightly fragments rather than stories. Warmth, movement, open space, then darkness again. Each time you surface slightly, the dugout is unchanged. Walls steady, roof intact. Air cool but breathable. That consistency lets your body relax more fully. Hours pass without you marking them. Rest does its quiet work. When you wake again, it is not with urgency but with a sense of mild clarity. The heaviness has eased, not gone but reduced. Your body feels more capable than it did before you lay down. You sit up slowly and test yourself. Head steady, hands responsive. You breathe in deeply and feel air move cleanly through your chest. Cold remains, but it no longer presses as hard. Rest has done what it could. This is how recovery often looked here. No dramatic turning point, just a gradual easing. Enough to keep going, enough to face another night. You adjust your bedding again, spreading it to dry as much as possible in the faint light. You move deliberately, conserving effort. The dugout watches silently, indifferent to your condition, but reliable all the same. As the day edges forward again, you feel gratitude for this shelter, imperfect as it is. It gave you space to rest when rest mattered. In winter, that was sometimes the difference between continuing and not. You sit quietly for a moment, letting strength return in small increments. Outside, the prairie waits unchanged. Inside, you feel steadier than you did before. The night has passed without taking more than it needed, and that feels like a victory. As your strength settles back into something usable, you begin adding small comforts, the kind that would look insignificant to anyone else but matter deeply here. These are not improvements meant to impress. They are adjustments meant to soothe. A dugout becomes livable not through grand changes but through tiny decisions repeated until they feel natural. You start with placement. You move your bedding a few inches, just enough to avoid the coldest patch near the wall. The difference is subtle, but your body notices it immediately. Heat lingers longer. Pressure eases in your hips. You remember the spot without trying, the way you remember where to step in the dark. You take a scrap of cloth and tuck it into a narrow gap near the doorway, where cold air likes to slip in low. It does not stop the draft completely, but it slows it. That is often enough. Winter life teaches you to aim for improvement, not perfection. The dugout feels quieter today, as if it has accepted these changes. Or maybe you have. You sit back and rest your hands on your knees, letting your breathing fall into a steady rhythm. Familiarity grows quickly in small spaces. Every surface becomes known. Every sound finds its place. You notice how light enters now, bouncing softly off packed earth, instead of cutting sharply through open air. You turn your head slightly to catch it better, letting it warm your face. People living underground learn to treasure light, to position themselves carefully to receive it. Even a few minutes made a difference. You reach for a small personal item, something you carried with you but have not used yet. Maybe a photograph folded thin. Maybe a token worn smooth by fingers. You set it near the wall, not for decoration, but as a reminder that life exists beyond this place. Many people kept such items close tucked into walls or hung from nails, grounding themselves in something familiar. You sit with that for a while, eyes resting on it, then turn away. Comfort here is measured in balance. Too much looking back pulls you out of the present. Too little makes the days feel empty. You adjust how you sit when you rest, leaning your back against the wall at an angle that supports your spine, without pressing cold directly into it. The earth holds steady. It does not yield, but it does not push either. You learn how to let it support you without demanding more than it can give. There is a rhythm to these small adjustments. Move, pause, notice, repeat. Over time, they build a sense of control that matters more than warmth. Control keeps your mind from spiraling when the wind picks up or the night stretches too long. You notice that your hands feel less stiff now. Circulation improves with movement and rest combined. You flex your fingers, slowly feeling warmth spread. You tuck your hands into your sleeves when you sit still. That simple habit becomes automatic. The smell of the dugout has softened. Still earthy, still damp, but familiar enough that it no longer draws your attention. You realize you have stopped noticing it entirely unless you think about it. This quiet adaptation happens without effort. The body decides what deserves attention and what does not. You listen again, not because you expect something, but because listening fills the space. Outside sounds drift in and out. Wind, snow shifting. A bird calling once, then silence. Inside the dugout remains calm. Walls hold. Roof stays firm. You begin to mark time through routine rather than hours. This adjustment happens naturally. Morning tasks, midday rest, evening preparation. Without realizing it, you build a structure that carries you forward. Many people live this way through long winter's days, blending into one another, distinguished only by what needed doing. You try sitting closer to the doorway for a few minutes, letting fresh air move past your face. The cold sharpens your senses briefly, then you retreat back to your warmer spot. You learn where comfort ends and exposure begins. The line is thin but clear. You make a small mental list of what helps. Bedding fluffed twice a day. Doorway checked morning and evening. Hay kept dry when possible. Movement balanced with rest. None of this feels like instruction. It feels like memory forming. Your mind feels calmer now, less restless. The dugout no longer feels like something temporary you're enduring. It feels like a space you understand. That understanding eases tension in a way warmth alone never could. You lie down again for a short rest, not sleep, just stillness. Your body sinks into the bedding more easily now, as if it recognizes this position as safe. You rest one hand on your chest and feel your breath rise and fall. Slow, even. A faint sound draws your attention. A gentle tap against the wall, then another. You realize it is just snow sliding off the roof in small amounts as the sun shifts. The sound no longer startles you. You know it now. Familiar sounds lose their power. You think about how comfort changes meaning in winter. It is not softness. It is predictability. Knowing what will happen when you move, when you rest, when you listen. The dugout offers that now. Not generously, but reliably. You adjust your blanket one more time and settle back against the wall. Your shoulders drop without effort. The space holds you without demanding attention. This is what comfort looks like here. Not luxury, not ease, but a steady absence of crisis. As the day drifts onward, you feel less like a visitor in this shelter and more like a temporary resident. The dugout is not home, but it has become yours for now. That quiet acceptance brings a sense of ease that carries you forward into the next night, prepared in small, careful ways. As evening returns, you become more aware of how bodies share space when there is not much of it to share. You imagine how this dugout would feel with more people inside. A woman folding herself carefully onto the bedding, a child already half asleep before the light fades. Another body means more warmth, but also more breath, more movement, more sound. Space becomes something negotiated moment by moment. You shift where you sit, testing how much room there really is. One person fits easily enough. 2 would require agreement. 3 would require patience. Families who lived like this learn to sleep in patterns, not positions. Someone turns, someone else adjusts. Knees tuck in, arms overlap. No one spreads out fully. The dugout teaches restraint without saying a word. You picture a mother settling a child near the warmest spot closer to where a small fire once burned. Children slept deeper, warmer, their smaller bodies tucked into layers of shared bedding. Adults often took the edges closer to walls or doorways, absorbing more cold without complaint. This quiet redistribution of comfort happened nightly, an unspoken routine shaped by care rather than fairness. The air would change with more bodies. You notice it even imagining it. Breath warms the space faster but also thickens it. Condensation gathers sooner. Someone coughs. Someone shifts. Sleep becomes lighter, more responsive. Yet people adapted. They always do. You recall how evening routines would stretch longer with children present. Stories whispered low, not for entertainment alone, but to ease fear. Darkness presses harder on younger minds. A familiar voice pushes it back. Even underground, even in winter, people carried this habit with them. Words cost nothing and gave rest something to lean on. You lie back and trace the outline of the space again, mentally placing where each person might sleep, where bundles would be stacked, where a lamp might hang safely out of reach. The dugout becomes a puzzle you solve differently depending on who is with you. Shelter is never just walls and roof. It is how bodies arrange themselves inside. You notice how your own breathing sounds louder in the quiet. Multiply that by several people, and the dugout becomes alive with small noises. Breath, fabric shifting, a child murmuring in sleep. None of it loud, but none of it ignorable either. Some found that comforting. Others found it exhausting. Both reactions could exist in the same person on different nights. You think about how privacy changes meaning here. There is no separate room, no door to close. Privacy becomes internal. Thoughts kept quiet. Emotions held carefully. People learned to coexist without constant explanation. Silence was a shared resource. You adjust your blanket and imagine doing so without waking someone beside you. Movements become smaller, careful. Even the act of turning over becomes deliberate. That mindfulness carries into waking hours too. Living close reshapes how you move everywhere else. The dugout walls feel closer when you think this way, but not claustrophobic. Just occupied. Space filled with presence rather than emptiness. You understand why some people felt less lonely underground even when conditions were harsh. Company changes the weight of walls. You listen again to the outside world, imagining how children would interpret those sounds. Wind scraping, snow sliding, distant calls in the dark. Stories gave those sounds meaning, turned fear into something manageable. A wolf becomes a character. The wind becomes a traveller. Night becomes something that passes rather than something that threatens. You shift your weight and feel the bedding respond. One body makes an impression. Several would shape it completely, compressing hay into something firmer, warmer, more familiar. Bedding in shared spaces became a collective object adjusted by everyone, owned by no one. You notice how the idea of shared warmth feels appealing as the temperature drops again. Even now alone you feel the cold creeping back. 2 bodies would slow that. 3 would slow it more. Winter teaches the value of proximity. At the same time you sense the cost. Less air, less movement, less quiet. Sleep interrupted by needs that are not yours. A child waking cold, someone coughing, someone shifting endlessly. The dugout holds everyone equally, but bodies bring their own demands. You sit quietly with these thoughts, neither idealizing nor rejecting them. This was simply how nights passed for many people. Not every night, not forever, but long enough to matter. You lie back again and let the imagined presence fade. The dugout returns to holding just you. The space feels larger now, almost generous. You stretch your legs slightly, enjoying the freedom while it lasts. Outside, night deepens again. Inside, you prepare for another stretch of sleep, aware now of how differently it might feel with others near. Solitude here is neither better nor worse. It is simply one version of survival. As you close your eyes, you carry that awareness with you. The dugout is a flexible thing. It changes depending on who enters it. Tonight it holds one body. Another night it might hold many. Either way, it does what it can, pressing earth and effort together to keep winter at bay. The night brings weather with it this time, not gently but with intent. You sense it before you hear it. Pressure shifts. Air thickens. The dugout feels tighter, as if the earth itself is bracing. Then the sound arrives. Wind pushes harder across the prairie, no longer content to slide past. It leans into the land, testing every weak place. Snow follows soon after. Not the soft drifting kind, but the driven kind that moves sideways, rattling dry stems and piling quickly where it finds resistance. You lie still and listen as it collects against the hillside above you. Each gust adds weight. Each pause lets it settle. This is the night you worry about the entrance. You sit up slowly, careful not to waste warmth, and crawl toward the doorway. The air there is colder, sharper. Snow has already begun to stack against the opening, exactly as you hoped it would, but more aggressively than before. Insulation becomes obstruction very quickly in a storm like this. You reach out and brush some of it away, opening a narrow channel. Cold rushes in, immediately stinging your face. You pull back and let the opening narrow again. The balance is delicate. Too open and the dugout bleeds heat. Too closed and air grows stale. You decide to wait and watch. Back on your bedding, you listen to the roof respond. Snow thumps softly as it lands, then settles. The poles creak once, not sharply, just enough to make their presence known. You hold still, breath shallow, counting the seconds until the sound passes. It does. The roof holds. Time stretches. Storm time always does. Without light or clear markers, minutes blur into one long moment. You wake fully now, alert despite fatigue. Sleep gives way to vigilance. This is not fear exactly. It is tension sharpened by necessity. Another gust sends snow sliding down the roof. This time it lands closer to the doorway, muffling outside sound further. The dugout grows quieter, cocooned in white. That quiet is deceptive. You know it means the entrance could seal if the storm continues. You move again, pushing up onto your knees and clear the opening just enough to feel air move. Your gloves soak through quickly, fingers numbing. You work fast, then retreat, tucking your hands back into your sleeves and breathing warmth into them. Snow crystals cling to your cuffs, melting slowly. You sit back and wait. The storm does not ease. Wind pulses, then pauses, then returns. Each cycle adds another layer to the mound outside. You imagine the shape of it growing smooth and heavy, pressing gently but insistently. Your thoughts narrow. Roof, doorway, air. Those are the only things that matter now. Everything else waits. You press your ear lightly to the wall, listening for changes. The sound of wind dulls further. Snow absorbs everything. The dugout feels buried deeper with each passing moment. It is not panic that tightens your chest, but calculation. How long can this last? How often should you clear the entrance? How much energy do you have? You lie back down, conserving strength, and let the storm do what it will for a while. There's no advantage to fighting it constantly. Winter favours patience. You time your movements between gusts, waiting for lulls before crawling forward again to clear a small path. Each time you do, the cold feels sharper. Your body protests, then adapts. Muscles stiffen, then loosen. You work without thinking, movements efficient, stripped of hesitation. This is not a new lesson. The dugout has been teaching you this all along. Eventually, exhaustion presses harder than worry. You clear the entrance one last time, opening just enough to feel fresh air brush your face, then retreat fully inside. You settle onto your bedding heart, still beating fast, and pull the blanket tight. The storm continues, but you cannot track it forever. Your body insists on rest. You listen for the roof one more time. It holds. You listen for the walls. They remain steady. You feel air move faint but present. That is enough. You let your eyes close, knowing you will wake again if the dugout asks you to. Sleep comes lightly balanced on awareness. Outside, the storm works the land relentlessly. Inside, the earth presses close, holding shape, holding space. By morning, you know the world will look different. For now, you trust the shelter you built and the patience you learned. The snow piles higher. The wind tires eventually. The dugout waits it out with you inside, breathing slowly beneath the weight of winter. Morning comes muffled as if wrapped in layers. You wake to a quiet that feels thicker than usual, the kind that tells you snow has finished its work and settled in. The dugout is dim, the doorway almost completely swallowed. Light reaches you indirectly, now reflected and filtered, pale and cold. You sit up slowly, testing the air first. It moves faint but present. Relief spreads through you in a measured way. You crawl toward the entrance and push gently. Snow resists packed tight from the night storm. You clear it carefully, sending a small avalanche outward. Cold air rushes in sharp and clean, and you breathe it in deeply. Fuel is the first thought that follows. Fire kept small last night. Wood used sparingly. You glance at what remains and already feel the calculation forming. Out here, winter decides what burns. When wood runs short, creativity steps in. You step outside briefly, boots crunching into fresh snow. The world looks newly erased. Drifts curve softly where fences and grass once broke the surface. You scan the ground for anything usable. Broken branches carried by wind. Dry stems. Anything that promises heat. Back inside, you arrange what you found, knowing it will not last long. People in this landscape learned early that firewood was a privilege, not a guarantee. Trees did not grow where they lived. Heat came from effort and improvisation. You remember hearing about how dried animal dung was collected and stacked like bricks left to cure in the sun before winter. It burned hot and steady if you could tolerate the smell. Not everyone used it, but those who did rarely apologized. Warmth outranked pride. You wrinkle your nose at the thought, then remind yourself that survival rewrites standards quietly. You strike a small flame and coax it gently. Smoke curls, then thins as it finds its way out. The smell of burning fuel fills the dugout stronger and less pleasant than wood, but undeniably effective. Heat blooms quickly, pressing back the cold that lingered from the storm. You sit close enough to feel it without inviting trouble. The fire crackles softly, an unfamiliar sound that makes you pay attention. You watch it carefully, ready to smother it if needed. Fires here are companions, not servants. They require constant respect. Warmth spreads into your hands and face. The change is immediate and welcome. Muscles loosen, breath deepens. You let yourself sit with it for a while, absorbing heat the way the dugout absorbs sound. Outside, snow continues to reflect light into the doorway. The storm has left behind a world that feels paused. No tracks yet, no movement, just white stretching in every direction. You feel small inside it, but protected. You feed the fire sparingly, letting it do its work without demanding more than necessary. When the fuel dwindles, you let it fade naturally, covering the embers with dirt once again. The smell lingers sharp but familiar now. Another scent added to the catalogue of winter. You take stock again. Less fuel than before, more snow than before, but the dugout holds. You hold. That balance matters more than comfort. As the morning progresses, you notice how the storm reshaped the land. Snowbanks now guide wind differently. Drifts form new barriers. The dugout entrance sits lower than before, tucked into the hillside like it was always meant to be there. Storms do this. They finalise decisions. You settle back against the wall, feeling the warmth from the fire linger faintly. It will fade soon, but not entirely. Heat leaves slowly when it has nowhere else to go. You pull your blanket closer and let the morning stretch. There is no rush now. Travel would be difficult. Work can wait. Winter days often became about waiting for conditions to soften rather than forcing progress. Patience conserves more than energy. You sit quietly listening to the muted world outside. Snow absorbs sound the way earth absorbs heat. Everything feels distant, insulated. The dugout becomes a small island of intention beneath the drifts. You breathe slowly and let the stillness settle. Fuel will be an ongoing concern. So will warmth. So will smell. None of it surprises you anymore. The dugout has taught you what matters and what does not. For now you are warm enough. The storm has passed. The earth above you is quiet again. You rest in that calm knowing winter will ask for more later, and you will answer in whatever way you can. As night settles again, you notice how the dugout changes your thoughts as much as it changes the temperature. The ceiling feels lower when you're tired. The walls feel closer when the wind rises. The earth presses in, not physically, but mentally, a constant reminder of weight and depth. You're aware of how much land sits above you, how much quiet it contains. You lie back and stare into the dimness eyes, tracing shapes that are not really there. In low light, the mind fills gaps eagerly. Shadows become curves. Curves become forms. You blink and they vanish only to return when you stop paying attention. This is how underground spaces work on the imagination. They invite inward thinking. Your breathing slows as you settle. Each inhale feels deliberate, each exhale measured. Air moves differently here, thicker somehow, carrying your own presence back to you. You hear your breath echo softly off the walls, then disappear into the packed soil. It feels intimate, unavoidable. Some nights the closeness would weigh on people more than the cold. You can feel that possibility now hovering just at the edge of awareness. The urge to stand, to stretch fully, to see the horizon. You resist it. You remind yourself that movement costs heat and energy. You stay where you are and let the feeling pass. The dugout teaches patience through limitation. You cannot pace. You cannot escape the walls. You learn to sit with sensations rather than outrun them. Over time, this changes how you think. Worries shorten. Thoughts become practical. The future shrinks to the next hour, then the next breath. You shift slightly and feel the earth behind you respond with steady resistance. It does not give, but it supports. That firmness becomes reassuring. The ground will not surprise you. It will not move quickly. You borrow that steadiness for yourself. Outside, the wind rises briefly, then falls away again. Inside, the change registers only as a faint pressure in your ears. The dugout filters the world, deciding what reaches you and what does not. That filtering calms the mind, even as it limits the senses. You close your eyes and let darkness settle fully. With no visual distractions, your attention turns inward. You notice your heartbeat steady and even. You notice the warmth gathered around your core, fragile but present. You notice the edges of cold waiting patiently at your feet and shoulders. Thoughts drift toward things you normally avoid when busy. Choices made. Roads taken. Roads not taken. Winter nights leave space for reflection, whether you want it or not. You let the thoughts come and go without chasing them. They feel less urgent down here. You adjust your blankets slightly, the movement small and practiced. Fabric whispers, then stills. The sound feels loud for a moment, then fades. Silence returns thick and complete. The dugout smells familiar now, so familiar you almost forget it. Earth, hay, smoke. These scents blend into something neutral, almost comforting. Your body recognizes it as safe enough. That recognition matters. You feel sleep approaching again, not rushing but circling. The kind of sleep that comes from exhaustion rather than comfort. It is heavy and shallow at the same time. You let it take you where it can. As you drift, you notice how the dugout shapes your dreams. They feel closer, more contained. No wide landscapes, no open skies. Just fragments, warmth, pressure, darkness. You accept that too. A faint sound reaches you not from outside, but from within the walls. A subtle shift as the soil responds to cooling temperatures. You stir, then relax. You know this sound now. It no longer demands attention. Your breathing deepens further. Muscles loosen. The tightness in your chest eases. Sleep settles more firmly, smoothing the edges of thought. You're aware dimly that living this way for weeks would change you, that your tolerance for silence would grow, that your need for constant movement would fade. The dugout does not rush transformation. It applies pressure slowly, consistently until adaptation happens. Tonight you are partway through that process, not fully comfortable, not fully unsettled, somewhere in between. That in-between space is where sleep finally holds. You sink deeper into the bedding, letting your body give in to gravity and fatigue. The earth holds you without comment. The world above continues without you for a while. As sleep takes you again, the dugout remains unchanged. Wall steady, roof firm, air cool but breathable. The quiet is complete enough to rest inside, and for now that is all you need. Evenings stretch differently when there's nothing to do but sit with them. You notice it as soon as the light fades again. Without chores demanding attention, time opens up wide and quiet. This is when stories used to fill the space. Not written ones, spoken ones. The kind shaped by repetition and memory rather than polish. You imagine sitting here with a low lamp glowing softly, flame steady, but small just enough to push back the dark. Shadows would gather in the corners unmoving while faces leaned close together. Stories would begin without ceremony. Someone clearing their throat, someone else shifting on the bedding, then a voice calm and familiar threading words through the stillness. Stories served a purpose here beyond passing time. They anchored people to something larger than the cold pressing in around them. Tales of places left behind, of warmer seasons, of moments when things went right. Even stories about hardship carried comfort because they ended. Night would end too eventually. You lie back and imagine listening rather than speaking. The rhythm of a familiar voice would steady your breathing. Pauses would stretch comfortably, no one rushing to fill them. Words would move slowly, shaped to fit the space. Underground sound travels differently. It feels closer, warmer, almost physical. You think about how stories would change over the winter. The same ones told again and again, gaining details, losing others. Jokes sharpened by repetition. Scary moments softened by familiarity. Children would know when to laugh, when to lean closer. Adults would know when to lower their voices. In the absence of books, memory did the work. People carried stories in their heads the way they carried tools ready to be used when needed. Even those who were not natural storytellers learned to repeat what they heard. Accuracy mattered less than comfort. Familiarity mattered more than surprise. You notice how your own thoughts begin to take on that same shape now. Memories surface in fragments. A face, a laugh, a place that felt safe once. You do not follow any single thread for long. You let them drift like stories half told, unfinished but soothing. The dugout amplifies this inward turn. With no wide view to distract you, the mind becomes its own landscape. Stories unfold there instead, You picture scenes vividly, perhaps more vividly than you would in a bright room. Darkness sharpens imagination. You imagine someone telling a story about a winter storm worse than this one. Snow so deep it swallowed fences. Wind that howled for days. The ending would always reassure. They survived. They were warm enough. The dugout held. Stories often did this quietly, reinforcing trust in the shelter without naming it. You shift your weight and feel the bedding compress. Hay rustles softly like punctuation. In shared spaces, even these sounds would blend into the storytelling part of the background rhythm. No one would shush them. They belonged. You think about how laughter would sound here. Muted, careful. Laughter cost breath and energy, but people still used it sparingly like a spice. A brief laugh could lift the heaviness of a long day more effectively than fire. Sometimes the stories would be practical. Advice disguised as anecdote. Someone once dug too close to the creek and learned why that was a mistake. Someone else built a roof too thin and paid for it later. These stories passed knowledge gently without instruction. You listened, absorbed, remembered. You realize how much of that knowledge lives in tone rather than words. A pause before a warning, a raised eyebrow at a certain moment. In the dugout, those cues mattered. People watched faces closely. Light was scarce. Attention was focused. You lie still, letting imagined voices fill the space. The dugout feels less empty this way, even though you're alone. Stories have that effect. They create company out of memory. Your breathing slows further as you settle into this mental rhythm. Each imagined sentence carries you deeper into calm. There is no rush to reach an ending. The telling itself is enough. You notice how the dugout seems to hold sound even when none is there. Silence has weight here. It presses gently rather than sharply. It invites quiet reflection instead of demanding it. You imagine the last story of the night trailing off. Someone yawns, someone else shifts closer to the wall, the lamp dims. Darkness returns fully, but it no longer feels empty. It feels earned. You bring your attention back to the present moment. The dugout's quiet. No voice is real or imagined. Just the steady presence of earth and your own breath. You let that be enough. Your thoughts slow to the point where they no longer form sentences. Images drift without structure. The edges blur. Sleep approaches again, carried on the echo of stories never fully told. As you close your eyes, you feel a sense of continuity. People before you filled nights like this with words and warmth. Tonight you fill it with memory and imagination. The effect is the same. The dark feels less heavy. The cold feels less sharp. You settle deeper into the bedding, letting the last fragments of imagined voices fade. The dugout holds steady around you, unchanged. Outside, winter continues its quiet work. Inside, you rest, accompanied by stories that need no telling to be felt. Sleep does not stay deep for long tonight. You drift, then surface, drawn back by a sound that feels too close to ignore. It is faint at first, almost imagined. A soft scraping near the wall, then a pause, then another scrape, more deliberate this time. You hold still and listen. The dugout is quiet enough that even small movements carry weight. Your breath slows, automatically body alert without panic. Whatever it is, it knows you are here, or at least senses warmth. Winter drives creatures to take chances they would not take otherwise. The sound comes again close to the floor. A quick series of tiny taps, then stillness. You picture whiskers, claws a small body testing the boundary between outside and in. Mice are common visitors in places like this. They slip through gaps no wider than a thumb drawn by heat crumbs, the promise of shelter. You shift your weight slightly enough to make the bedding rustle. The sound stops immediately. Silence stretches. You wait. After a moment, the scratching resumes softer now, farther away. The animal has learned something. So have you. You relax just enough to breathe normally again. This is not fear. It is negotiation. The dugout is not a sealed world. It is shared whether you like it or not. You accept that quietly, the same way others did before you. Another sound reaches you heavier this time, a dull thump somewhere above. Snow sliding again, or maybe something larger moving along the hillside, you cannot tell. The roof does not respond, no creak, no shift. You let that thought settle and move on. Outside, the night is active in ways daylight hides. Hooves might pass in the distance, animals moving cautiously through drifts. You hear nothing clear enough to name only impressions. The dugout filters sound, leaving you with hints rather than certainty. You think about how thin the walls really are. Packed earth, yes, but still part of the land. Animals move through this landscape daily, noses close to the ground, sensing what you cannot. They know you are here long before you hear them. Most keep their distance. A few get curious. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders and tuck your feet closer to your body. Warmth matters now, but so does stillness. Movement draws attention. You let the dugout do its job. The scratching returns briefly, then fades completely. The animal has moved on, finding something easier elsewhere. You release a breath you did not realize you were holding. Your body settles back into the bedding, but your mind stays alert for a while longer. Every small sound registers. A shift in the walls. A faint click as frozen moisture drops from the ceiling. The low whisper of wind passing over snow. You remind yourself that danger rarely announces itself clearly. It whispers, tests, retreats. Most of the time nothing follows. Living here teaches you to distinguish between signals that matter and those that do not. You think about larger animals for a moment. Wolves, coyotes, even the occasional wandering bison in earlier years. None would bother with a dugout unless desperate. Humans smell wrong to them. Fire smells wrong. Earth reshaped smells wrong. You are safer here than you would be in the open. That thought brings a measure of calm. You let your muscles soften again, releasing tension from your jaw and shoulders. The dugout remains steady, indifferent to the small dramas at its edges. Sleep returns gradually, not all at once, but in layers. You drift, then surface briefly. When a sound shifts, then drift again. Each time it is easier to let go. Your body learns that most disturbances pass without consequence. At some point the night grows quieter, animals settle, wind eases, snow stops moving. The dugout feels deeply still, as if tucked into the land rather than pressed against it. Your breathing evens out. Thoughts lose their urgency. The world narrows again to warmth, pressure, darkness. The outside remains alive, but distant enough to ignore. You sleep aware on some level that you share this place with more than just yourself, but unbothered by it. This is how nights pass here. Not perfectly safe, not constantly threatened, just lived moment by moment with attention and acceptance. As sleep deepens, the last small sounds fade into background presence. The dugout holds its shape, the land moves on around it. You rest inside that balance, letting the night carry you forward without resistance. When morning comes again, you find yourself comparing this place to other shelters you have known, even if only briefly. The thought arrives uninvited as you sit up and stretch joints stiff but willing. You imagine a canvas tent snapping in the wind, its walls breathing cold no matter how tightly they're tied. You imagine a wooden cabin, logs shrinking and swelling seams, opening just enough to let drafts sneak through. Each option carries its own kind of discomfort. You run your hand along the dugout wall and feel its steady resistance. Earth does not flap. It does not creak with every gust. It stays where it is put. That steadiness is something you've come to appreciate even if you miss light and height. Underground, the temperature shifts more slowly. Nights are cold, but not suddenly so. Days warm, gently, never dramatically. That moderation counts for a lot in winter. You picture sleeping in a tent during a storm like the one that passed. Snow piling against thin fabric. Wind pressing it inward until it touches your face. Every sound amplified, every movement felt. Some people preferred that openness, the sense of space, even in bad weather. Others found it unbearable. You imagine lying awake holding poles steady, knowing one wrong gust could change everything. Cabins offered more room, more light, and a sense of permanence, but they demanded materials many settlers did not have right away. Fresh-cut logs held moisture. They froze, thawed, and split. Chimneys smoked poorly until properly built. Cabins took time to learn, time winter did not always grant. You think about how many people plan to build cabins later using dugouts as stepping stones rather than destinations. Here in the dugout, effort feels immediate. Dig, pack, adjust. Results appear quickly. There is satisfaction in that. The walls respond to pressure. The roof settles under weight. The shelter becomes part of the land rather than sitting on top of it. Snow works with you instead of against you, insulating rather than tearing. You shift your position and feel how the floor remains cold but predictable. No sudden drafts brush your ankles. No fabric snaps in your ear. Sound stays low, contained. That quiet has grown on you. It makes rest easier even when sleep comes in fragments. You consider how people often judge shelters by appearances rather than performance. Dugouts looked primitive. They sat low, sometimes barely visible from a distance. Visitors from towns or established farms often frowned at them. Yet when winter settled in hard, these same visitors sometimes lingered longer than planned, appreciating warmth that did not vanish with the wind. You glance toward the doorway and imagine it opening into a cabin instead. A solid door, hinges, a latch. That would be nice. You also imagine the work required to build it, the materials, the time. The dugout required fewer decisions. Fewer things could go wrong all at once. You lie back again, briefly feeling the earth cradle your weight evenly. No springs, no boards, just packed soil and hay. Your body has adjusted to it more than you expected. Comfort, you realize, is often just the absence of surprise. The dugout also keeps you hidden in a way other shelters do not. Smoke rises low. The roof blends into the hillside. From a distance, nothing announces that someone is here. In unsettled times, that invisibility brought a certain peace of mind. You imagine watching riders pass without noticing you, the land keeping your presence quiet. You think about spring eventually arriving, about thaw turning the floor to mud, about water seeping in where it does not belong. No shelter is perfect forever. The dugout excels in winter, then demands attention when seasons change. That trade feels fair. You sit up again and stretch your legs, feeling circulation return. Your body knows this place now. It responds without complaint. That familiarity tips the balance in the dugout's favour. Comparisons fade as they always do when reality reasserts itself. You're here not in a tent or a cabin, and here right now you're sheltered. The walls hold. The roof stands. The cold stays manageable. You pull your blanket around your shoulders and settle into the moment. Judgments soften when conditions are met. The dugout may not impress anyone, but it does its job. In winter, that is the highest praise available. You take a slow breath and let it out. The earth around you remains steady, unconcerned with what it's compared to. It simply is. And for now, that is enough. When the thaw begins, it announces itself quietly at first. You notice it in the way the floor feels under your palm, no longer sharply cold, just cool and faintly damp. The change is subtle, easy to dismiss, but it does not stop once it starts. Winter loosens its grip one small degree at a time, and the dugout feels every shift. Water appears where it did not belong before. Not a flood, just a sheen. Darkened patches spreading slowly along the packed earth. You scrape at one with your fingers and feel moisture cling. This is the trade winter never mentions while it's happening. Warmth returns, but dryness leaves. You sit up and check the walls. Tiny trails mark where melted frost has begun to run downward, carving thin paths through the dirt. They look harmless, almost decorative, but you know better. Left alone they widen, they soften the floor, they invite mud. You gather what you can and begin adjusting again. Bedding lifted and shifted to higher ground. Hay shaken and spread where light can reach it. damp earth scraped away and replaced with drier soil from the edges. These movements are slower now, heavier. Mud clings. Nothing stays clean for long. The smell inside the dugout changes with the moisture. Earth grows richer, heavier, almost sweet in places. The sharp edge of winter fades, replaced by something thicker. You breathe through your mouth for a moment, then stop thinking about it. This is how seasons pass here, one sensation replacing another. You step outside briefly and feel the ground give slightly under your boots. Snowbanks slump, their clean lines softening into curves. Water trickles in places that were solid only days ago. The prairie looks tired, like it has been holding its breath for months and finally let go. Back inside, the dugout feels smaller somehow. Not physically, but in tolerance. Winter forgave tight spaces and low ceilings. Spring demands flexibility. You find yourself stooping more carefully, watching where you place your hands. A careless brush against the wall leaves dirt smearing your sleeve. You open the doorway wider now, letting air move freely. Cold no longer punishes this choice. Instead, it helps. Fresh air carries moisture out slowly, patiently. You sit near the entrance and let it work even as your feet grow chilled again. There is a moment when you wonder which season is harder. Winter with its cold and stillness, or this in-between time with its mess and unpredictability. You have no answer. Each asks for something different. The dugout adapts, but only if you stay attentive. You notice small sounds you didn't hear before. Water dripping, mud shifting under its own weight. The roof responds differently, now lighter, without snow, but less stable as the earth above softens. You listen carefully, learning a new language after months of fluency in winter. You move your bedding again, this time placing it on a slight rise you carve into the floor. It is not comfortable, but it stays dry longer. Comfort yields to necessity once more. The pattern repeats. Your hands grow coated in mud despite your efforts. You wipe them on your trousers and laugh quietly at the futility of staying clean. Cleanliness belongs to other seasons. This one is about management. As the day wears on, sunlight reaches deeper into the dugout than it has in months. It warms the walls unevenly, creating more moisture in some places and drying others. You watch the process unfold, making small adjustments as needed. There is no finishing this work, only responding to it. You sit back when fatigue presses in and rest against the wall, careful to choose a dry spot. The earth feels softer now, more forgiving to lean against, but also less reliable. Everything has its moment. You think about how many people moved on from dugouts at this stage, choosing to build above ground once thaw made it possible. You understand the impulse. The dugout shines in winter. In spring it demands patience of a different kind. Still it holds. Muddy, damp, imperfect, but standing. You breathe in the heavy air and let it out slowly. This place has carried you through the hardest season. You can carry it a little longer. As evening approaches, you make one last pass through the space, lifting, scraping, adjusting. The dugout looks rougher than it did in winter, but it feels alive again. Change has arrived, and with it, new challenges. You settle back onto your bedding and listen to water drip softly nearby. The sound is not threatening, just persistent. Like time itself. You let it fade into the background as you rest, knowing that tomorrow will bring more of the same quiet work. The dugout and you move forward together, leaving winter behind one damp inch at a time. As the days grow longer and the ground softens, you begin to understand why some people spoke fondly of dugout life long after they left it behind. Not because it was easy or clean or pleasant in the usual sense, but because it worked quietly and reliably when little else did. You sit near the entrance and let mild air brush your face. It feels almost strange not to brace against it. Winter trained you to expect resistance. Now the air arrives gently, carrying hints of damp grass and thawing soil. The dugout holds that scent for a while, then lets it pass through. It breathes more easily now. There is a comfort in how little this place asks of you most days. No walls to repair plank by plank. No roof shingles to replace after every storm. The earth settles when it wants to settle and you respond. That simplicity appeals to a certain kind of person, especially one tired of fighting the land rather than working with it. You remember how warm the dugout stayed during the worst nights, how the cold never struck suddenly, but arrived slowly, giving you time to adapt. You remember storms passing overhead, while you lay still, listening safe enough to sleep. Those memories soften the frustrations of damp floors and low ceilings. You lean back against the wall and feel its steady support. It has not changed much since winter, even as the surface world transforms. That consistency is rare. Above ground, everything announces the season loudly. Below it, change comes in whispers. Some people stayed in dugouts longer than expected for this reason. They trusted them. They knew how they behaved. Familiar problems felt easier than unknown improvements. Even when cabins were built later, some dugouts remained in use as kitchen storage spaces or cool shelters during hot months. The earth did not stop being useful when winter ended. You think about how quiet life felt here, how days passed without constant interruption, how attention narrowed to what mattered: eat, rest, maintain shelter. That focus brought a kind of calm you did not anticipate. Modern life rarely allows that kind of simplicity, even when conditions are comfortable. You sit with those thoughts and realize how little you have missed noise, how rarely you have wished for more than what fits inside these walls. The dugout stripped life down to essentials, and in doing so it revealed how many extras usually fill your days. You stretch and feel strength return to muscles that grew patient over winter. Your body adapted to learning how to rest deeply and move deliberately. Those habits linger. You suspect they would stay with you even after leaving this place. Light reaches farther inside, now illuminating corners that stayed dark for months. You notice details you missed before: tool marks, small cracks, the places where earth and effort met imperfectly. None of it bothers you. Imperfection feels honest here. You realize that the dugout has taught you something about shelter beyond walls and roofs. It taught you how much comfort comes from predictability, from knowing what to expect when conditions turn harsh. It taught you that warmth does not need elegance, only consistency. You stand and brush dirt from your clothes, preparing to step outside again. The dugout remains behind you, quiet and unobtrusive. It does not demand gratitude, but you feel it anyway. This place carried you through nights when the world above felt hostile. As you step into the open air, you glance back once more. The dugout blends into the hillside, almost invisible now that snow is gone. It looks small, unremarkable. Only you know what it provided. You breathe in deeply and feel the season shifting fully. Life will move on, shelters will change, but the memory of this one will linger not as hardship, but as proof that simple solutions can carry you through difficult times. For some, that memory was enough to keep them close to the earth long after winter ended. And as you turn away, you understand why. Not everyone stayed as long as you did. You feel that truth settle in as you sit quietly and let the day pass. The dugout works, yes, but it asks something specific in return. Patience, humility, a willingness to live close to discomfort without letting it become resentment. You imagine someone else in this space standing up too quickly and knocking their head on the ceiling, cursing under their breath. Someone who never quite adjusts to crouching, to watching every movement. For them, the dugout would feel like a mistake, compromise that lingered too long. They would count the days until they could leave. You understand that impulse now too. The low light wears on you. The constant awareness of walls presses gently but persistently. There are days when you crave open air more than warmth, when you would trade insulation for sky without hesitation. You think about the work required to move on. Building above ground means hauling materials, shaping wood, committing to a place in a way the dugout never fully demands. The dugout feels temporary even when it lasts. For some, that impermanence is comforting. For others, it is unsettling. You notice how easily water finds its way in now that the ground is soft. How the smell of damp earth lingers longer each day. These changes do not bother you as much as they once did, but they remind you that this shelter has a season. Its strengths fade as conditions shift. You picture someone deciding one morning that this is enough, that they want walls that breathe less, floors that stay dry, light that reaches without effort. They pack what they can step outside and do not look back. The dugout remains slowly blending into the hillside again. For others, the dugout becomes a storage place, a memory, a footnote. For some, it collapses quietly after being left untended. Earth returns to earth. Nothing dramatic, just settling. You run your hand along the wall once more and feel the texture change where moisture has softened it. This place demands maintenance now more than it did in winter. Attention shifts from survival to management. That transition does not suit everyone. You consider how people weigh comfort against effort differently. Some endure cold gladly if it means light and space. Others accept tightness and darkness in exchange for warmth and quiet. There is no correct choice, only personal thresholds. You sit back and rest your head against the wall, feeling its cool firmness. For you, this place worked when it mattered most. That does not mean it must work forever. Shelters are allowed to be temporary. You look toward the doorway and imagine it opening onto a cabin someday, or onto open ground as you move on. Either path feels possible now. The dugout no longer feels like the only option. It feels like one chapter. You stretch your legs and let circulation return. The space feels smaller than it did in winter, not because it changed, but because you did. Adaptation has limits. Growth brings new needs. You take a final quiet moment to acknowledge both sides of this shelter. The protection it offered, the constraints it imposed, both shaped you in ways you did not expect. As the light fades again, you feel ready to leave when the time comes, not rushed, not bitter, just aware. The dugout has given you what it could. Knowing when to move on is part of survival too. For those who stayed only briefly, the dugout was a trial. For those who stayed longer, it became familiar. And for those who left, it faded quickly into memory. You hold all those truths at once as you sit quietly, letting the earth press close one more time. You begin to think about what will remain here after you leave, not in a dramatic way, just quietly as the day settles into evening. The dugout already looks older than it is. Earth does that. It softens edges quickly, pulls everything back toward itself. From a distance, this place could pass for a natural dip in the hillside if someone did not know what to look for. You step outside and turn back to study it. The roof blends into the slope grass, beginning to reclaim patches where sod was disturbed. Rain and thaw have already blurred the lines of your work. In time, there will be very little to suggest someone slept here, listened here, endured winter nights beneath this ground. That thought does not trouble you. It feels appropriate. This shelter was never meant to announce itself. It was meant to disappear once it had done its job. Many places like this vanish the same way, leaving behind only shallow depressions and stories passed down sometimes inaccurately, sometimes not at all. You imagine someone walking this land years from now, pausing briefly where the ground dips slightly, wondering why snow gathers there first or grass grows thicker. They may never guess what it was, or they might know immediately, trained to read land the way people once did. You crouch and touch the earth near the entrance. It feels ordinary now, cool, damp, anonymous. The dirt does not remember you in a way you can see. Whatever imprint you left exists only in time, not in form. You think about how quickly shelters fall out of use once they are no longer needed. One season they are vital. The next, they are forgotten. The dugout does not protest this. It does not crack or collapse dramatically. It simply settles grain by grain. You sit back on your heels and let that image rest in your mind. There is something calming about impermanence when it is expected. You were never meant to stay here forever. The dugout was never meant to last. Both facts sit easily together. As evening light fades, the hollow grows harder to see. Shadows fill it gently. The land resumes its uninterrupted shape. From this angle, the hillside looks almost untouched. You return inside one last time, not out of need but out of habit. The space still feels familiar, though already a little distant. You sit and listen to the quiet you've learned so well. Walls do not shift. Roof doesn't respond. The dugout rests. You think about how memory works, how experiences compress over time, how nights that once felt endless become moments when recalled later. This place will become that, a condensed impression. Cold, earth, silence. Not every detail will survive, but the feeling will. You stand again and brush dirt from your hands. The gesture feels ceremonial even though you did not intend it to. You step back out into the open air and leave the entrance untouched. Let it settle. Let it fade. As you walk a few steps away, you glance back once more. The dugout sits quietly, already blending in. It does not demand acknowledgement. It does not ask to be remembered. You breathe in deeply and feel the open space around you. The sky feels wide after so long underground. Sound travels farther. Light reaches without effort. The contrast is gentle rather than shocking. You have adjusted both ways. You carry the knowledge of this place with you now, not as nostalgia but as understanding. You know what it is like to sleep beneath the ground in winter. You know what it takes. You know what it gives. The land accepts your departure without comment. The dugout remains, slowly becoming nothing more than a suggestion in the earth. That is how most of them end. Quietly. Completely. You continue on, leaving behind a place that once held you through the coldest nights. The memory stays even as the shape disappears, and that feels like enough. You return one last time to the place where sleep once came slowly and left quietly. Not because you need to, but because endings ask to be witnessed. The dugout sits as it has, low and unassuming, already halfway back to being land rather than shelter. Evening light softens its edges, smoothing what winter once sharpened. You lower yourself inside again and let your body settle where it knows how to settle. The space receives you without reaction. No creak, no shift. Just the familiar firmness of earth and the faint echo of your breath. It feels smaller now, or maybe you're simply more aware of how you fit within it. You lie back and close your eyes, not to sleep, but to remember how it felt when you did. The cold that crept rather than struck. The darkness that pressed gently instead of threatening. The way sound arrived muted and left quietly. These sensations return easily, like a posture your body never forgot. You breathe slowly and feel the floor beneath you cool but steady. You remember counting breaths on long nights, listening to snow settle, waking briefly to adjust a blanket or clear an entrance. You remember how sleep came in fragments at first, then learned how to stay. The dugout holds those memories without keeping them. It does not cling, it does not resist being left behind. Earth is good at that. It offers what is needed, then lets go. You open your eyes and take in the space one last time. The marks on the wall, the curve of the ceiling, the doorway framing a slice of outside light. All of it feels complete now. Nothing more needs to be added. Nothing needs to be taken. You sit up slowly and feel your body respond easily, no longer stiff, no longer braced. The habits you learned here linger, but they no longer dominate. You stand and brush dirt from your hands, then pause, letting the moment settle. As you step out into the open air, the sky feels vast in a way it did not before. Light spreads freely. Sound carries. Your shoulders drop as if released from a long-held posture. You breathe deeply and feel space return to you. You turn back once more, just briefly. The dugout remains quiet, already blending into the hillside, already loosening its grip on form. Soon it will be indistinguishable from the land around it. And that feels right. Now as you move away and let the image fade, your thoughts slow with you. The pace of those nights underground lingers, encouraging gentler breaths, longer pauses, softer attention. You carry that with you, not as weight, but as calm. You let your steps become slower, lighter. The world around you dims gradually, edges softening. The memory of packed earth and muted sound wraps around your thoughts like a familiar blanket. You're safe now. You're warm enough. There is nothing left to prepare for tonight. So let your breathing deepen. Let your shoulders relax. Let the quiet expand. The dugout fades fully from view, and with it the effort it once required. What remains is stillness, steady and unhurried. You rest in that stillness, now letting sleep arrive the way it always does best, gently without force. The last light slips away without asking for attention, and you allow it to go. There is nothing left to hold on to now. No walls to test. No roof to listen to. Only the quiet understanding that the night no longer requires anything from you. Your breathing becomes slower without effort, deeper without instruction, as if your body remembers how to do this on its own. Each inhale arrives cool and calm. Each exhale leaves you a little heavier, a little more settled, as though gravity itself has softened. You imagine the earth once more not above you now, but beneath everything steady and patient, holding the world in place, while you drift gently away from thought. There is no cold to manage, no sound to interpret, only a smooth, unbroken stillness that asks nothing in return. The memories of the dugout fade the way footprints fade after snowfall edges, rounding details, blurring effort, dissolving into something quiet and distant. What remains is not hardship, but calm, not confinement, but rest. Your shoulders loosen, your jaw unclenches, your hands grow warm and relaxed, fingers no longer holding anything at all. If a thought drifts through, it passes without catching. If an image appears, it softens and slips away. There is no need to follow anything now. The night stretches safely around you, wide and gentle, and sleep moves closer with unhurried patience. It does not rush, it does not pull, it simply waits, knowing you will meet it halfway. So let your breathing slow just a little more. Let your body sink fully into stillness. Let the quiet do what it has always done best. You're done for today, nothing more is required, and sleep can take you whenever it is ready. Sweet dreams.